Chapter 701. The greater possibility is that it's me. But this was just his speculation, it needs further verification. They traveled for a few more hours. Finally, the group has arrived at Li Rong's territory. The city gates were opened, and everyone and everything made their way in. It was late, and after rooms were assigned, everyone retired for the night. The next day, the early morning light seeped in through the window. Fang Hao tightened his quilt and groggily opened his eyes. Li Rong's territory had no glass, the windows were empty, and there was no sensation when waking up. But once asleep, a chill sensation could be felt. He got out of bed and was about to leave the room. He heard a notification for a private message from the Book of Lords. When he checked, it was from Zhang Bin. "Boss, I am currently with Scholar Nelson, he has seen the picture." Fang Hao instantly perked up. What did the scholar say? Could he identify who was in the picture? The scholar said it's the Gold Queen. Zhang Bin replied. Gold Queen? Darn, that name is quite extravagant, and indeed, a lot of gold items were found in that underground palace. All kinds of utensils and statues were made of gold. So, does the scholar know her? Normally, Nelson was recruited not for his memories but his knowledge, thus not including the memories of anyone else. This was done to increase a hero's loyalty. Otherwise, if the recruited heroes still remembered their former master, there would be a fear that they would run away as soon as they were recruited, let alone join the territory. Zhang Bin replied, he said it's written on the pattern, he can figure it out, but it may not necessarily be the hero's prefix, it could be a title given by followers or citizens. Fang Hao understood. So, the hero's prefix wasn't Gold Queen, but she was obsessed with gold and thus called Gold Queen. That's strangely similar to his own hobbies. Can he estimate her power? Scholar said it's quite high, he recommended not to risk it. Fang Hao thought for a while, and continued, this Gold Queen should be in a deep sleep, ask Nelson if there's a way to recruit her, to make her join my territory. Zhang Bin quickly got a response. He said, the scholar said you can try, if she has needs, she may join the territory, but if she's really an undead queen, the chance of recruiting her isn't high. So, it seems, she's easier to recruit when she's destitute. Why would she work for you when she's a queen who lacks nothing? Fang Hao responded, her status probably isn't very good, I'll come for Nelson when it's time and let him try. Zhang Bin replied, I told Scholar Nelson, do you have anything else, boss? If not, I'll head back, it's too cold in this museum, I feel like my yang energy isn't sufficient. Alright, you go ahead. Okay. He ended the chat. Fang Hao recontemplated the layout and location of the entire underground palace. Although the location of the underground palace was 2 days away, it was still within the range of Silver Wing City. Building an undead's underground palace under the watchful eyes of the church took quite some audacity. Add to that the few guards within the palace, and the pyramid-like design of the palace. All these made Fang Hao more curious about this Gold Queen. Now that he has found her, he definitely wouldn't give up. He would let Nelson try when it's time. If that fails, he'll figure out another way. After having figured everything out, Fang Hao left his room. As soon as he left his room, he saw Li Rong wearing a red robe. Seeing Fang Hao, her eyes betrayed a bit of reproach. I left the door for you last night, you didn't really come. Stop kidding. Fang Hao sat down nearby and started to have breakfast there. After breakfast, Li Rong habitually lit a cigarette. With a light clap of her hands, militiamen came in from outside carrying treasure chests one after another. 8 treasure chests, all filled with silver, are all here. Chapter 702. Looking at the 8 treasure chests, Li Rong's eyes were filled with intense eagerness. How wonderful it would be if all these 8 chests were hers. However, she knew that this was all wishful thinking. How could they all belong to her? For transmigrators, treasure chests were their opportunities for growth. Unpacking high-quality items could significantly enhance their territory's overall power. Though she had brought many people for this mission, the ones who contributed the most in the battle were Fang Hao's followers. She initially thought her subordinates would flaunt their strength in the battle, but they ended up doing menial tasks. They were left to do tasks such as looting equipment, burying bodies, and carrying things. Her side looked like a moving company, with everyone briskly getting to work. It seemed like Fang Hao was about to take the lion's share. She hoped he wouldn't be too greedy considering she provided the map and worked hard. Thinking this, she pulled down her collar a bit, exposing a bit more of her fair skin and attractive cleavage. Fang Hao did not have as many thoughts as Li Rong. To him, the silver chests were of too low grade. Even if the chests contained an item, it would be at best of blue-graded quality. For his territory at this stage, such items were of little use. In his view, the most valuable thing in this underground palace was not these 8 silver chests, but rather, the final room of the Golden Queen. There must be another chest in it, which certainly ranks higher than silver. Fang Hao glanced casually and said, "According to our deal, should we split them evenly? 4 chests for each of us." "Really?" Li Rong's face lit up with joy. Feeling slightly embarrassed about her excitement, she attempted to keep her composure, but found it hard to conceal her excitement. "That was what we agreed on, there's nothing false about it." Fang Hao responded casually. "Ahem. Fang Hao, you put in the most effort during this exploration. You can take a bigger share." If Li Rong had taken advantage of the battle, she would have demanded without hesitation a greater share of the loot. "No need, let's just split it as we decided." Fang Hao went straight to the chests. He promptly opened 4 of them. Obtained, blueprint for white steel scale armor, blue grade, blueprint for white steel knuckles, blue grade, blueprint for runestone bed, green grade, 102 warfire coins, 4 shadow stones. Obtained, blueprint for silver-edged small round shield, blue grade, blueprint for pure white frying pan, green grade, 125 warfire coins, 3 shadow stones. Obtained, blueprint for white steel helmet, blue grade, 4 undead golden statues, 105 warfire coins, 6 shadow stones. Obtained, blueprint for spirit stone table, blue grade, blueprint for mithril helmet, blue grade, 98 warfire coins, 3 shadow stones. All 4 chests had been opened in quick succession. As he had expected, most of them were blue-graded blueprints. He had already collected the blueprints for the white steel scale armor and the white steel helmet before. These were surplus blueprints. Although the rest of the blueprints were not very useful to him, they could be used to expand his blueprint collection. "So, how about you? Did you get anything good?" Fang Hao looked at Li Rong. By now, Li Rong was grinning from ear to ear, as if she had just found a fortune. This made Fang Hao suspicious that he might have chosen the less rewarding chests, while Li Rong hit the jackpot. "I got lots of blueprints, all blue-grade ones," Li Rong excitedly announced. "Phew!" Fang Hao sighed in relief. "Just blue-graded blueprints? I thought she had found something special." Without any desire to ask her what exactly she got, Fang Hao directly said, "You can sell the shadow stones to me. You won't use them anyway." "Sure, you can have them." Li Rong generously pushed over a dozen shadow stones to Fang Hao. She could not use these items of the undead faction anyway. "Do you have the blueprints for the white steel scale armor and white steel helmet?" "I've got duplicates, so I can give them to you," Fang Hao asked. "Really? I don't." Fang Hao generously gave her the surplus blueprints. Li Rong happily accepted them, immediately recording them in her Book of Lords. After saving the blueprints, Li Rong looked warily at Fang Hao. "Are you really just giving me these blue-graded blueprints? You're not regretting what happened last night and trying to win over my favor, are you? Give it a rest, will you? Do I need to curry favor with you?" "You're already overflowing with goodwill," Fang Hao countered. Li Rong blushed. "Stop talking nonsense." Fang Hao paid no mind and continued, "I'll need your help later, so consider this a preemptive thanks." Li Rong thumped her chest, declaring righteously, "Just say the word when the time comes, and I'll handle it for you." Thanks in advance." Next, they split the gold and silver utensils found in the underground palace evenly between them. The collected shadow stones and death traces were all allocated to Fang Hao. Li Rong got slightly more utensils. After splitting the loot, both of them were very satisfied. Fang Hao obtained a decent amount of shadow stones and death traces. Li Rong not only obtained many blueprints but also a lot of gold and silver. With this gold and silver, she had the funds needed to maintain her business in the shop, solving many of her problems. While still in high spirits, Li Rong took Fang Hao on a tour of her territory. Her territory was simply divided. The barracks and functional buildings were located in one area. The rest of the land was filled with factories. A large stretch of large factory buildings housed workers, producing the cosmetics sold at the Fairy Dream Tower. This was to maintain her supply of cosmetics. While chatting, Fang Hao learned that in addition to the villagers she had recruited, Li Rong had also employed a large number of locals in the nearby villages. Chapter 703. But the supply is still rather tight. If we want to set up branches in other cities, then the current scale of the factory simply cannot sustain it. Either we raise the prices to the point where ordinary people can't afford them and only serve the nobles. Otherwise, we need to expand the scale of the factory, build more factories, recruit more staff. But with Li Rong's current capabilities, these were all unachievable. Even the idea of opening a second store in the city was fraught with difficulties. A lot of money has been spent on it, and it's still in negotiations. The clothes you are selling on the channel aren't bad either, have you considered a partnership? Li Rong, standing at the factory door, said while smoking a cigarette. How would we collaborate? Put your clothes up for sale in the Fairy Dream Tower, and we split the profits when they're sold. The main product at the Fairy Dream Tower is cosmetics, and clothes don't sell particularly well. However, there are many people who buy cosmetics, which also boosts the sales of products on the second and third floors. It's just not that obvious. Therefore, Li Rong was also considering how to increase sales of clothing and accessories. I'll have to think about it. I plan on setting up a shop in the city as well, which would have implications for my store if I provide for you. Fang Hao responded softly. You're planning to set up a shop in Silverwing City? It's not easy to start a business, even with connections you might not secure it within a year or so. Li Rong was first surprised and then analyzed. No need. When the time comes I'll ask Rebecca and Olivia to speak on my behalf, there shouldn't be any problems in setting up a shop. Fang Hao's tone remained calm and collected. Li Rong wanted to retort, but her words caught in her throat. If Olivia helped, then opening just one shop wouldn't be too difficult. You're one tough cookie, Li Rong said through gritted teeth, a trace of jealousy in her voice. Let me think about it when I go back. I have stores in Lyss City and Pruel City, you could sell your cosmetics through them. Both of them were eyeing each other's goods. Phew. Li Rong crossed her arms over her chest and exhaled another puff of smoke. We'll see, let's wait until I open my second shop in Silverwing City and ensure that product supply can keep up. All right. Both of them returned to the Lord's mansion. In the afternoon, they went back to Silverwing City directly. Meanwhile, elsewhere, on the border of the desolate battlefield. After a few days' journey, Dong Jiao led an undead army of 2 million, finally entering the region of the dwarf's 8 Peaks mountain. The undead possessed advantages that the living creatures did not. They could travel day and night without knowing a trace of fatigue. Such a large number, the food and supplies they carry is merely for the needs of the accompanying living creatures. The seemingly endless white-bone army stood neatly in place. In the middle of the army, a large tent made of stitched beast skins was erected. In the middle of the tent, there was a table made of logs, displaying a map of all the cities and routes on the 8 Peaks mountain. The map was provided by Belarga. It recorded the slopes, woods, and paths within the 8 Peaks mountain in great detail, without any errors. In front of the map, Dong Jiao sat in the middle. On either side were the Dragon Clan skeleton hero Spencer, Troll skeleton hero Meatfist, Orc skeleton hero Black Sword, Human skeleton hero Heavy Arrow, and the Dwarf hero Belarga. Behind these heroes was a second row of people. There were 13 transmigrators, 12 of which were under Dong Jiao's city lords, the other one was Deng Bin, and Deng Bin's hero, Zachary. Fang Hao planned to end this war before winter arrived. So, he also promptly summoned numerous heroes to assist Dong Jiao in battle. Amongst them, Spencer and Meatfist were orange heroes, Belarga was a purple hero, Black Sword and Heavy Arrow were blue heroes. When these transmigrators saw such a luxurious team of heroes, they all became dumbfounded. Since when did heroes become plentiful like cabbages, popping up one after another? Originally worried about the war, they began to feel excited and thrilled. Dong Jiao looked around and spoke softly, Commander Belarga, please introduce the situation of the 8 Peaks mountain to the new city lords. Spencer and Meatfist were later called for reinforcements. They didn't know about the previous situations. Belarga took a thin wooden stick, sketched out a few areas on the map, and said, these are the 12 border strongholds of 8 Peaks mountain, each with a decreasing number of 5, 4, 3 in order, and finally this city built on the slope is the main city of 8 Peaks mountain, Grey Iron City. Next, what they had to do was attack the first 5 strongholds out of the 12. Belarga paused slightly, continuing, These 12 strongholds are mutually vigilantes. If one is attacked, the surrounding strongholds will immediately support it, so it will be rather difficult to break. If it were any other race, Belarga would definitely say that it's impossible to break it quickly. But when he thought of the endless neatly arranged undead army outside the tent, he fell silent again. It seemed that when facing such a fearless army of death, all defenses were futile. After finishing the introduction, Belarga put the wooden stick aside. Seeing that he stopped talking, Dong Jiao continued, "Dwarves are good with machinery, not with numbers. Even if they have reinforced, the defenders of the first 5 strongholds will not exceed 50,000, perhaps even less, so everyone please discuss, how should we fight this war and how to plan the strategy." The scene fell into a brief silence. Chapter 704. Everyone was quietly contemplating the map. Meat Fist, a robustly built man, was the first to speak. "Our advantage is great, there's no need to think too much. Just charge straight in. Take over 5 border strongholds tonight, then use these as a basis to push further into their territory. The strengths and weaknesses of the two sides are indeed very obvious. With the addition of 2 more orange heroes, this battle basically has no suspense." Spencer, who was at the side, nodded in agreement, then added, "We outnumber them, so it wouldn't be beneficial to target just one stronghold. We also have to be wary of reinforcements from other border strongholds." He pointed to the map and suggested, "I propose splitting our forces to distract the other strongholds. The main force shall attack the one in the middle and we'll take it down. In the night, we'll envelop the other strongholds to swiftly take down the outermost 5. Everyone stared at the map, analyzing Spencer's plan. At the same time, they were figuring out the feasibility of this plan in their minds. Overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers is a tactic the undead clan excels at. The dwarves are proud of their machinery, but against so many of us, it'll surely be a futile effort. In no time, Black Sword also agreed, "This plan is feasible, we have ample information on the dwarves, a direct strike will suffice. It's a good plan." Dong Jiao stood up, glanced around and asked, "Does anyone else have any other opinions? Spread the forces first, then mount an offensive with the main force." "No objections." "Agreed. Sounds good." Seeing everyone agree, Dong Jiao continued, "All right, tonight, I and Spencer will lead the main troops in the attack. The remaining commanders, each of you will lead troops to distract the other strongholds. The remaining transmigrators will assist each commander." "Yes." Everyone responded simultaneously. The main role of the transmigrators was to act as communicators, using the Book of Lords to transmit messages back and forth. Secondly, creating some tools to make certain things easier. Dong Jiao nodded, "All right, we still have about 3 or 4 hours, everyone go back and get prepared." "Yes." Everyone responded and left the tent in succession. Night fell. Within the command hall of the dwarf stronghold, the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Hester, sat anxiously in his chair, with the sound-transmitting shell in front of him. He was just silently staring at it. "Commander Hester, what did the king say? When will the reinforcements arrive?" an old dwarf asked. "Yes, when will the reinforcements arrive?" This border stronghold was not just a fortress but also a city. The people present were the heads of powerful families within the city. A dwarf scout had reported the nearness of the undead. It scared many people out of their wits. Hester too looked just as grim. Just more than a week ago, he had been promoted to a commander. Who would have thought that the first battle he would participate in as commander would be so challenging? Inside, he began to envy the commander who had been stripped of his rank for making a mistake. At least he was safe in Grey Iron City. He, on the other hand, seemed to have control over the army but was posted on the front lines. But at this moment, he also had to reassure the city's notables. "Don't worry, we still have time. And getting from one stronghold to another isn't that easy," Hester reassured them softly. He too was waiting for news from Grey Iron City. The request for reinforcements had been sent several days ago, but still, there was no reply from Grey Iron City. Just as the nobles in the city were breathing a sigh of relief, they suddenly sensed that something was off. All heads turned in unison to the water glass on the table. There, they saw rhythmic ripples forming in the water, and then the chandelier above started to shake. Finally, even the ground began to rumble beneath them. "What's happening? An earthquake? Hurry out, there's an earthquake!" The hall turned into a complete uproar instantly. At the same time, alarms started ringing loudly from outside the city. Hester's face turned pale instantly. Before he could check anything, a soldier ran in. "Commander, the undead have begun attacking the city." Chapter 705. Hearing the words of the soldier, the color drained from Hester's face. The complexion of the other dwarves in the hall also turned ash-colored. The panic had faded to become a numb stillness. They now understood that the rhythmic trembling beneath their feet spelled the undead had begun the siege. Boom, boom, boom. The regular tremors became more distinct, vying with the increasingly frantic toll of the outer bell. Hester could pay no more attention to other matters. He quickly grabbed a battle axe from nearby and strode out. He walked the whole length to the city wall. When he climbed up to the city wall, he could feel the entire wall gently shaking. He stood there, gazing down from the city wall. The assaulting undead had no torches. Under the thick night, he could vaguely see moving silhouettes. Hester took a hard swallow. He looked at the communication shell once again, but there was no movement. What was Grey Iron City doing? They hadn't even come up with a solution yet. Was sending reinforcements so difficult? But, at this time, he could only suppress these thoughts. Looking around at the soldiers on the city wall, filled with fear and unease. Hester knew that in their current state, it would be challenging to hold the city. Once the fight began, deserters might appear. He swept his gaze over the crowd, and then shouted, "Reinforcements from Lord Rune are already on their way, all we need to do is hold out for 2 days, just 2 days, then the time for us to counterattack will comes. Long live Lord Rune! Reinforcements?" All of the warriors looked cheered. 2 days was not long, they would be safe soon. Their morale surged. All the warriors raised their arms and shouted, "Long live Lord Rune!" Boom, boom, boom. Just as the dwarves' spirits rose, diluting their fear of the undead. Somewhere below, the low beatings of war drums suddenly sounded. At first, the drumbeat was not quite in rhythm, but gradually, it became more consistent. With the steady beat of the drums, a grey pulse of light expanded rapidly. It transformed into small rings of light appearing under the feet of the undead warriors. Straight after, the dwarfs saw rings of light appearing under the undead's feet. The night was still dark. But the grey light rings were unusually conspicuous. In the dwarf's vision, it was endless and dense, light rings reaching as far as the eye could see. Hester was stunned. All the dwarven warriors turned dumbfounded. What were these numbers representing? Even if the dead from the past decade of 8 Peaks Mountain were dug up, they wouldn't amount to as many undead as there were outside. How are they supposed to fight this? "Commander, Commander, they've started charging," a dwarf shouted loudly. Hester snapped awake, looking at the front. The undead were already holding their weapons, beginning their charge. This charge showed no regard for strategy or coordinated tactics. They were just rushing headlong toward the city. They even didn't have siege ladders or battering rams. "Fire! Musketeers, ready!" Hester gave the order loudly. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of dense cannon fire erupted, with cannonballs being dropped into the undead army. As the cannonballs fell, a swath of undead was flung up into the air. Gunsmoke filled the whole area, with the cannon fire lighting up the sky. After a few more rounds, deep pits appeared on the ground. At the same time, Hester noticed something else. Off in the distance, carts covered with oily skins, pulled by skeletal cows, entered the battlefield. The cart's cargo was unloaded, the oily skins were pulled away, revealing large cannon barrels. Hester's heart skipped a beat. The undead also had cannons. How could they possibly have cannons? Meanwhile, he saw a group of humans running out from the back of the team. They began filling the cannons with ammunition. Then, using a torch, they lit the fuse. They moved with practiced ease. "Damn it, take cover!" Hester shouted. Boom, boom, boom. The undead's cannons unleashed torrents of flaming debris. Heavy cannonballs struck the city wall, exploding the stones and soil. Dwarves were thrown into the air, the city wall under the cannon's bombardment, left with several cracks that resembled spider webs. Hester straightened up, they weren't undead. They had no fear of facing cannon fire. Shaking his head to clear the dizziness, he issued an order, "Destroy their cannons." The cannons turned, aiming towards the enemy's position. Boom boom. The cannons of both sides greeted each other, exploding within their respective camps. The whole earth continued to shake, and the air filled with the scent of gunpowder smoke and charred earth. By this time, the undead had reached the foot of the city wall. The dwarven musketmen opened fire. They didn't even have to aim, just pull the trigger and any random shot struck a skeleton. However, the bullets did minimal damage to the skeletons. Unless it hit the skull, hitting the body did not do much real harm. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets accompanied by spurts of flames rained down. At the same time, the skeleton shooters on the undead side also reached their firing position. Following orders, they began firing at the dwarf shooters on top of the wall to suppress them. Bullets whizzed by each other incessantly. The night was lit up. The cannon fires and the bullets turned the battlefield eerily bright. The skeleton warriors began to swarm at the foot of the city wall, stepping on each other, quickly spreading up the city wall. In the undead region, Dong Jiao was sitting in the center of the army, holding the Book of Lords, reading the messages from the others. As expected, the 4 nearest dwarven fortresses had sent reinforcements. On their way, they were killed by the ambushes that he had previously set up. 4 armies had also reached the foot of their target fortresses and were making preparations for the siege. Chapter 706. Now, it was time to take down this city. Dong Jiao looked at Spencer on the side and said softly, "Spencer, please take the bone dragon and take this city down." Spencer nodded, "All right." As soon as his words fell, he leaped high into the air, morphing into a massive dragon form, heading for the city. Following him were several bone dragons. At this moment, the skies were devoid of the moon's light. All sorts of smoke and dust shrouded the sky, like a dense fog. Through the clouds, Spencer looked down at the battle below. The dwarfs were still resisting, their cannons had already turned their barrels, blasting at the tightly packed skeletal soldiers scaling the walls beneath them. Boom! Boom! The barrage of cannon fire temporarily halted the skeletons ascending the city wall. In an instant, Spencer had reached the city's airspace. Swish! 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 The orange-hued bullets whizzed past him. The dwarfs were aware of these invaders. Bang! Bang! Arrows as thick as arms were deployed towards the airborne wyverns. Spencer couldn't afford to ignore them, these arrows were designed specifically for dealing with aerial units. The dragon lock crossbows designed by the trolls posed a threat to the bone dragons. Even more so for the improved dwarf-made equipment. Dodging the airborne arrows, Spencer began to flicker down at high speed. Roar! The flame breath poured onto the city wall. The crimson flames swept past, incinerating everything in its path. The dwarf bodies were instantly turned to charcoal, and the cannons on the wall also melted into molten iron as the flames swept across. In an instant, half of the city wall had been completely cleaned. The bone dragons, trailing behind Spencer, also arrived at this time. After clearing the city wall, they circled in the sky, spewing out beams of black light onto the dwarf soldiers below, trying to climb the city wall. In a short time, the undead had taken advantage of this gap to swarm onto the city walls. Following a brief engagement with the remaining dwarfs, they directly opened the city gates. Skeletons flooded into the city. They clashed with the dwarfs in the city. Flames of war ignited across the city, the sound of killing and roars echoed in every corner. Boom! Boom! With the city gates wide open, Dong Jiao stepped in leading her troops. Spencer descended from the sky to dutifully guard her safety by her side. Notify everyone to cease killing if they drop their weapons, Dong Jiao, holding her silver spear, announced loudly. Yes, the human clan soldiers immediately took her orders. The soldiers dispersed in all directions, shouting for the enemies to drop their weapons. Perhaps the dwarf soldiers within the city didn't believe in their offer, they continued to resist fiercely. But the city was also inhabited by numerous dwarf civilians who were not soldiers. Hearing the call, they had no other choice. The enemy had entered the city and resisting meant certain death. If there was a chance of survival, naturally, they wouldn't want to die. The people hesitantly dropped their weapons, kneeling on the ground. The initially brutal undead immediately stopped in their tracks, avoiding these people, and began to search for new targets. The noise of battle within the city slowly subsided. It slowly quieted down, with only occasional groans echoing through, proof of the recent battle. My lord, the prisoners have been locked into the prison, and we have found the arsenal, filled with over 20 cannons with 200 boxes of ammunition, a soldier reported. Good, take me to the warehouse. Dong Jiao directed. Following the soldier to the warehouse, Dong Jiao immediately opened the Book of Lords and distributed all the cannons and ammunition to the other transmigrators besieging the 4 frontier cities through the transaction channel. With these cannons, they should now be a match for the dwarfs in terms of firepower. After distributing the cannons, Dong Jiao looked at the map once more, and commanded, Deng Bin, take 50,000 men and block this road. I don't want to see dwarf reinforcements before noon tomorrow. The location Dong Jiao appointed was midway between the ensnared 5 and 4 fortresses. The road here was narrow, an easy position to defend and hard to attack. Her plan was to intercept the dwarf reinforcements in the rear. All right. Deng Bin immediately nodded. Dong Jiao continued to look at Spencer, leave Yang Xiaolan to defend the city, the rest will follow me to flank the remaining 4 cities. Yes. The city was littered with corpses. Blood had formed streams. After taking control, without even bothering to clean up the battlefield, they directed their forces towards the other cities. The army regrouped, heading towards the next target. While on the march, Dong Jiao kept glancing at Spencer. The advantages aerial units provided in siege battles had surprised her. In the future, she'd let Spencer and the Bone Dragons play a larger role. It could expedite the speed of their advances. At the same time, 8 Peaks Mountain, Grey Iron City. When the spectral image of Hester's soul appeared on the hero's altar, the numerous high-ranking dwarves in the audience descended into chaos. Hester's death was proof that the frontier fortress of the dwarves had fallen. The 8 Peaks Mountain was facing an unprecedented threat. Resurrect him. Rune held his staff, unflinching. All sorts of sacrificial materials were placed on the hero's altar. A flash of light sprung forth. Slowly, on the platform of the hero's altar, a figure of a naked dwarf grew. When the dwarf opened his eyes once again, he initially appeared dazed and confused, then, he understood he had died in battle and was just resurrected. Chapter 707. Below, a dwarf brought up some clothes. Having put them on, Hester kneeled on one knee. Your Majesty, the fortress has fallen. Rune looked at him, and asked gravely, tell me about the situation of the enemy. Yes, Your Majesty. Hester arranged his thoughts and began to explain slowly. When night fell, the undead began to besiege the city. Their numbers were massive, disregarding the cannon fire, they stormed the city walls. Moreover, they had undead dragons which could unleash red and black beams of light, attacking from the sky. Whoosh! This made the whole place even more chaotic. The siege began at night, and the city had already fallen by now. That is to say, Hester and his team could only resist for a few hours before they lost. This speed, even if Hester said it out loud now, none of them would dare to believe it. Hester, I think you are just shirking responsibility. Where can there be so many undead? Did you kill all the humans and orcs to make up this number? A dwarf stood up and shouted reprimandingly. The statement held true. The undead did not appear out of thin air, but had to be converted. Even the recruiting function of transmigrators required the consumption of resources for recruitment. How could they possibly have such numbers? Hester glanced at him without any response and turned his gaze back to Rune. Your Majesty, every word I say is true. I believe that the undead has the potential to threaten Grey Iron City, we should make preparations as soon as possible. Hester said in a solemn voice. A few days ago, scouts had detected the movements of the undead. He had reported the news to Rune through the sound-transmitting shell, and also requested reinforcements. But it appeared that Rune did not take this matter seriously. The reinforcements did not arrive, nor did he respond to his messages. Now the resultant issue was that the undead had managed to invade with ease. Defending against them in the later stages would not be easy. Rune did not respond immediately, only kept staring at Hester, seemingly trying to discern the truth from his words. Hester was dead, but how could there possibly be so many undead outside the 8 Peaks Mountain? But the matter had not yet concluded. Soon, an attendant walked in briskly. He announced loudly, Your Majesty, news from the border fortress, 4 fortresses have fallen. This. In the hall, there was a deathly silence. Conquering 5 cities in a day. The dwarven fortresses were as fragile as paper, the instruments that they boasted about had no effect as well. At this point, everyone believed Hester's words. Rune's face remained expressionless in silence. After a long while, he finally said, Prepare for defense, get in touch with Silverwing City, the dwarves need allies now. The next morning, after Fang Hao had breakfast, He received the news from Dong Jiayu. Overnight, 5 border cities were taken. This was a victory, but also somewhat expected. In the past, when their territory hadn't been this strong, they had already waged a similar war against the Bloody Mountain Ranges. The undead army completely obliterated the Bloody Mountain Ranges. Not to mention presently attacking the 8 Peaks Mountain. After praising Dong Jiayu and the others, he also made a large amount of ammunition and mechanical support for her. To ensure that during the battle, the following battles can proceed more swiftly. After chatting with Dong Jiayu, Fang Hao took Anjia and strolled some other pedestrian streets, visiting a few shops. At the same time, he was also observing the business streets, preparing to open a store here in the future. They hadn't walked far before Anjia and Lori had their hands full of various snacks. They ate while walking, pointing and commenting on the shops and pedestrians. Like 2 naive children visiting the city for the first time. While they were strolling, a few people adorned in church garbs walked towards them. They stood stiffly in front of the trio, blocking their way. At first, Fang Hao and the others tried to circumvent them, but they also moved and blocked their path again. Only then did they sense the abnormality. Frowning, they looked at the people in front of them. Templar Knight, Level 7. Templar Attendant, Level 5. The leader was a Level 7 Knight, while the others were Level 5 attendants. People from the church? Although the military unit's name was unfamiliar, the patterns on their clothing showed that they were from the church. The church was not only comprised of priests, but also had a defense army. Otherwise, they wouldn't have such strong influence among the humans. Want to pick a fight? Anjia's expression changed immediately when their path was blocked. Want a fight, huh? We're not afraid of you guys. Lori pointed at the Templar Knight at the forefront. Her voice was loud, but with her height, there wasn't much pressure. Fang Hao's countenance turned serious as well. On one hand due to his own alignment, and on the other, because in this city, the church was known to be quite extreme. He even thought that some of them were robbing people in the name of the God of Light, while being protected by a group of Lionheart Knights. Fang Hao asked, "Gentlemen, do you need something?" The Templar Knight's countenance was solemn and severe. "Who are you people?" Chapter 708. Who are you? The Temple Knight sternly inquired. Her demeanor was solemn, but her tone carried an undercurrent of interrogation and accusation. Getting halted on the streets. This condescending attitude was also causing a surge of anger within Fang Hao. Speaking coldly, "What's it got to do with you?" "Humph. We suspect that you are related to the undead. Come with us to the temple for an investigation." The Temple Knight spoke evenly. With that said, the other attendants began to advance. Made a move to arrest them. Shush! The Lionheart Knights all drew their long swords from their waist, vigilantly watching the approaching group. Seeing the other party drawing their weapons, the murderous look on their faces was all too real. The temple attendants froze in their steps, and did not dare to approach. "So, are you all going to resist?" The voice of Temple Knight became even colder. Fang Hao sneered, "I suspect you're a vampire. Come with us for an investigation." In fact, when he heard them mention the undead, he was genuinely shocked. But after thinking about it, he was sure that it was just an excuse. If they truly knew about Fang Hao's information, they would probably send the higher-ups to arrest him. However, coincidentally, Fang Hao does have relations with the undead. "Humph, are you intending to become adversaries of the church, enemies of the human clan?" The Temple Knight's voice was even more raised. A faint glow emerged from his body. The onlookers blocking the road, who were previously enjoying the show, bowed their heads in worship as though infected, muttering praises for the God of Light. Seeing the change in the crowd around, Fang Hao's tone refused to let up. If he were to follow them, then it would truly be dangerous. "Get out, stop asking for trouble." Upon hearing the insults, the stern-faced knight's face distorted into an agitated expression. He roared, "Seize these audacious people!" Fang Hao also shouted, "Arrest them, anyone who resists will be killed on the spot." Both sides gave orders. Armed, they charged at each other. Just as they were about to collide, the situation took a turn for the worse. From afar, a roar of rage could be heard. "Stop!" Following closely, was the sound of hurried footsteps. A group of heavily armed guards surrounded them. "Stop the thieves! Stop the thieves!" Simultaneously, a shrill yet familiar voice rang out. A burly captain with a green parrot perched on his shoulder walked over, positioning himself in the middle, blocking the on-edge groups. His voice was cold. Public brawl with weapons, how audacious! It was him. To Fang Hao and his companions, the green parrot was unforgettable. Upon recognizing the parrot, they knew that these were the patrolling guards they had previously encountered at the commercial street. Captain Baccarat, these people publicly insulted the church. Please arrest them, I will take them back to the church for trial, the temple knight spoke first upon the arrival of the patrolling guards. Seeing the other party take the initiative to file a complaint, Angia and Lori immediately refuted. They started the trouble first. Angia pointed at the other party. Lori also chimed in, we were just strolling around, and they stopped us, insisting on taking us away. Their words were even foul-smelling. The captain known as Baccarat turned to look at the temple knight, his voice serious, what happened? Captain Baccarat, we suspect that these people are related to the undead and we're planning to take them back for investigation. But they not only refused to cooperate, but also insulted the church and resisted arrest with weapons, the temple knight replied. Although the church has tremendous influence, Silver Wing City was still under the jurisdiction of the Hall of Justice. As a knight, he did not have any privileges in front of the patrolling guards. Upon hearing the knight's words, Baccarat's eyebrows instantly furrowed. He remembered Fang Hao and his companions. After all, the appearance of a female orc in the city had left a deep impression on him. People attending the conference in Lyss City were not ordinary. Saying they were related to the undead was an excuse to take them away, how ridiculous. Baccarat looked at the people from the church, disgust in his eyes. Speaking sternly, this matter ends here, stop causing noise in the street. Hearing this, the temple knight's face changed drastically. Although the church did not fully control Silver Wing City, it still held a position of great strength. It's impossible to settle this matter just with his words. Coldly, he said, Baccarat, they have insulted the church, insulted the god of light, you can't let them leave. As he said this, the light from him rose again. The people around them, once again affected by the light, showed anger, they screamed, don't let them go. It seems. Fang Hao noticed the changes in the people around him. This temple knight probably has a skill that could influence the emotion of believers. Why did he say believers and not just anybody? Because apart from the few who screamed along, many people were still just there, watching the situation develop. Baccarat's face darkened. Said, you say they are related to the undead, do you have any evidence? Humph, evidence naturally exists, but it isn't with us. Once we are back at the church and conduct further investigations, the truth will be clear, the temple knight remained unyielding. His resolute tone even made Fang Hao uncertain. Had they actually discovered him? If his true identity was revealed, he would have to kill and run. Chapter 709. How many days do you plan on interrogating him? Baccarat asked again. 7 days, or if the evidence is irrefutable, he'll stay in the dungeon forever, the temple knight answered. Baccarat sneered, the federal conference is in 7 days. If he can't attend, how do you plan to explain that to his lordship? Upon hearing these words, the temple knight seemed taken aback. Baccarat continued, you've taken him in today, but the one who ends up in the dungeon may not be him. Think it through. Are you saying he's a council member? The temple knight took another look at Fang Hao. I've said what needs to be said. If you have evidence that he's involved with the undead, arresting him would be quite the achievement. But if you don't, the church won't spare you, the Justice Alliance won't spare you, and all the council members attending the conference won't spare you. Think it through, Baccarat's voice grew lower. The temple knight's forehead began to sweat, and the attendant behind him was also looking at Fang Hao's party in surprise. Apparently, they had not investigated the identities of Fang Hao and his companions before stirring trouble. At this point, they were somewhat undecided. Involuntarily, they glanced towards a second-floor window of the tavern. Fang Hao, Angia, and the others noticed this movement and also looked towards the second floor. Their angle of view was different from the temple knights. They vaguely saw someone receding back into the shadows. Meanwhile, the temple knights below seemed to have received a signal and said, let's go. Hastily, they turned to leave. Fang Hao's brow furrowed, but he didn't attempt to stop them. Instead, he went straight to the entrance of the nearby tavern with his people, blocking the only exit. The faces of the temple knights changed as they tried to intervene, but Fang Hao and his party were quicker. They went straight into the tavern, ascending to the second floor with their retinue. They pushed open a room near the street. The inside of the room was lavishly decorated. A young man dressed in church attire was sitting by the window side of the table, nonchalantly eating. Seeing Fang Hao come in, he showed no surprise but gave a peaceful smile. "Mr. Fang Hao, we meet again." Recognizing the man in the room, Fang Hao's eyes narrowed slightly. It was him, that mixed-race guy. They had met briefly at the auction held by the Trade Alliance. At that time, they only nodded at each other from a distance, they never interacted. By now, Fang Hao only remembered that he was a saint from the church, he had forgotten his name. He watched the guy calmly greet him. He didn't seem at all flustered by what had just happened. Fang Hao sat down across from him, also smiling. "Yes, what should I call you, brother?" "Su Haid," he calmly said his name. At that moment, hurried footsteps could be heard outside the room, and the temple knights from earlier were seen rushing up. They were stopped by the Lionheart Knight, and both sides seemed ready for a fight. Su Haid spoke towards the door, "You wait outside." "Yes." The few people from the temple knights responded and obediently stood outside. "So, I offended Brother Su, and today you sent people to cause trouble for me." Fang Hao didn't beat around the bush and spoke directly. Su Haid maintained a calm expression, whether it was because he had spent a lot of time in the church or it was just his temperament, there was a certain emotionless quality about him, a lot like the others in the church. "I asked them to invite you over, but I didn't expect them to offend Mr. Fang Hao," Su Haid said. Fang Hao didn't believe his words. Earlier, the group had glanced at the second floor before giving up on antagonizing Fang Hao. It was clear that he was the one pulling the strings. But Fang Hao didn't plan on dwelling on this. "I'm here now, so what do you want?" "I heard that Mr. Fang Hao has some connections with the undead." As soon as the words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the room became tense again. Su Haid had just apologized, but now he was bringing this up. In fact, Fang Hao's connection to the undead wasn't a secret. The skeleton merchant would bring goods to the cities of various transmigrators every day. Although there was no skeleton merchant in Su Haid's city, learning about these matters in the channel wasn't difficult. "What? You're going to judge me on behalf of the God of Light?" Fang Hao scoffed. "The undead clan is the natural enemy of all living creatures. Once the conference and the church learn of it, they might spare no expense to eradicate your city. I'm afraid there would be no place for you in the 100 cities anymore." Su Haid took a sip of his wine after he finished speaking. He clearly displayed the demeanor of someone in a position of power. Fang Hao naturally understood Su Haid's intention, he was threatening him. He knew that Fang Hao must have some connection to the undead, and his earlier attempt to arrest Fang Hao was sincere. However, he didn't expect Fang Hao to be so audacious, not even considering the church personnel as a threat in Silver Wing City. Now, he was even more straightforward. But at the same time, he must have other things to discuss, otherwise, he wouldn't be telling Fang Hao all this. "Speak your mind." Su Haid put down his wine glass, "Help me with a few things. If you do well, your secret won't reach the church's ears." "Oh? I wonder what kind of favor you need help with." Fang Hao's eyes sparkled. Su Haid gave Fang Hao a serious look and stated outright, "Give me your Book of Lords. When I absorb it, you'll become my city lord, and then I'll tell you the tasks you need to perform." Chapter 710. This Russian is cautious. He didn't speak directly about the matter. Of course, Fang Hao was just testing the waters, seeing if he could tease out any information about the church. Now that the Russian isn't willing to talk, he doesn't mind. He scoffed, "You wish. If you don't want to talk, then so be it. Goodbye." Having said that, he stood up to leave. Su Haid didn't expect him to just get up and leave. He quickly said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll spill your secrets?" Fang Hao paused as he reached the door. Su Haid thought that Fang Hao was scared and was about to continue his threats. Instead, he heard Fang Hao's voice, full of murderous intent, say again, "Cherish the life you have. Don't court death." With that, Fang Hao turned and left. Only Su Haid remained, sitting stiffly in his chair, his hand frozen in the air with his glass half raised. Unable to make his next move for some time. He could feel that Fang Hao wasn't joking. Given his past actions, if pushed too hard he might actually kill him. But now, he's a saint of the church and his territory is a church stronghold. What could Fang Hao do to him? Where would he get the resources? Humph! Ridiculous. Su-Hade sneered and picked up his mug, drinking to his heart's content. After Fang Hao and his party left, the paladin and attendant outside also came in. They coldly asked, "Sir, should I gather the followers to arrest him?" "It wouldn't be difficult." Su-Hade gazed out of the window at the people leaving the pub. He smiled slightly and calmly said, "There's no rush. We won't take any action before the council meeting." "Very well, sir," the paladin replied. Su-Hade continued to stare out of the window, sneering as the figures disappeared. "What a bastard!" Angia fumed. "Exactly, what a bastard," Lori agreed. "If I get my hands on him, I'll smash his damned head in." "Smash his head in," Lori echoed, "do you want to eat it too?" Angia glanced at him, "Eat it." After leaving the pub, the two of them ranted and raved the whole way, cursing Su-Hade from head to toe. But they didn't forget to eat. They ate while they complained. After wandering around all morning, they returned home in the afternoon. Nobody came to bother them again. At 2 in the afternoon, someone knocked on the door. "Lord Mayor, the lady is having a tantrum. Could you check on her when you have the time?" The maid's voice came from outside. "A tantrum? Rebecca is usually very resilient. It's rare for her to lose her temper." Conveniently, Fang Hao was planning to discuss today's events with Rebecca. So he said, "All right, I'll be right out." After getting dressed, he left his room. He walked through the long corridor and stopped before a room. Standing at the door, he could hear the sound of things being thrown around inside. Whatever had upset Rebecca this much must be a big deal. He left the maid outside and went in alone. As soon as he entered, he saw Rebecca, about to throw a stack of books down from over her head. Seeing Fang Hao come in, she immediately calmed down. She slammed the books down onto the table and sat back in her chair, her expression stern. "What's going on? Who has angered our city's lady?" Fang Hao came over, put his hands on her shoulders, and softly asked. Rebecca was still angry. Standing behind her, he could see her full chest rising and falling dramatically with her anger. It was as if someone was inflating and letting air out of a balloon, over and over. Rebecca took a deep breath and angrily said, "There's a traitor in Lyss City who sold sensitive information to Grote. If these matters get out, we may not be able to get out of Silverwing City alive." Chapter 711. Who is Grote? Fang Hao suddenly blurted out, flabbergasted. People in this world had such long, peculiar names. He could only remember those of the people around him. Over time, he got confused about who was who. Rebecca sighed. "He's the representative of the Marshall family at this year's trade meeting. The one who got knocked out by Aceti's kick." "Oh, him. Well, how did he get his information? Is the news reliable?" Knowing this, Fang Hao remembered who he was. All along the way, he was the one setting up ambushes on the roadside. He really had a bag of tricks. When the attack failed, he tried another method. "It's information personally delivered by Olivia today, it must be accurate," Rebecca replied. "Is it that serious? Some unspoken rules that everyone knows, as long as your enemies cannot find any concrete evidence, but now Grote already holds our handle," Rebecca sighed deeply yet again. In reality, she should have thought about all this earlier. To deal with the faceless in the city, Rebecca had taken many nobles' lives. These nobles were all linked through marriage, cooperation, and more. The relationships were complicated and intertwined. Killing so many of them was bound to leave many problems. However, Rebecca didn't expect that things would escalate this quickly and ruthlessly, using the power of the Federation to kill her. Fang Hao thought for a moment, when the time comes, just deny it. Say that the evidence they hold is forged. Rebecca playfully hit him, "What are you talking about? Do you think this is a child's game? Denying until the end might not work, there might be a traitor in Lyss City that might testify. When that happens, there's no room for denial." Fang Hao thought about it and felt she was correct. This was not a school fight where one could deny just by gritting one's teeth. If Grote dared to bring it up in the conference, he must have made ample preparations. When evidence and witnesses come out, there would be no room to defend oneself. Seeing Rebecca's worried expression, Fang Hao still tried to comfort her, "Well, it will be fine, I'm here. I can take you away when the time comes." Rebecca tilted her head back, leaning lightly on Fang Hao's belly. She whispered, "What's the use of running away? Grote's goal would still be achieved, I wonder why he's so hell-bent on us, no matter how much we try to shake him off. Fang Hao felt the same way. This Grote, like a sticky flypaper, had his sights on they. Always causing problems here and there. After several failed ambushes, now it's coming to this. This was obvious confrontation. Don't think too much about it, as long as people survive, there's hope. Lyss city is in your hands, they can't seize it from us. If it comes to avoiding contact with other cities and fearing the Federation, I have enough troops to protect Lyss city, Fang Hao said, gently massaging her shoulders. You don't understand. Humans are different from other races. Whether it's trade or politics, all cities need to establish connections. Once Lyss city is isolated, it will gradually decline in a few years. Rebecca's body relaxed as she responded, not as fiery as before. Fang Hao thought about it and felt she had a point. Life was indeed less developed among the orcs than the humans. This was related to their focus on raiding. The human clan, on the other hand, was much more orderly and developed quite well. But Fang Hao could solve these problems. He already had enough territory. Connecting all cities and establishing a trading ring shouldn't be difficult. Of course, if they could keep their membership in the 100 cities, that would be the best. If not, the interior would be enough for their survival and development. After thinking it through, Fang Hao continued, you don't need to worry about this. Now we have many cities within our territory. We can establish our own trade network. We can live well. Rebecca nodded, indicating that she understood. In the past, she had to bear and solve all these problems herself. Now, having someone to listen to her worries and help find solutions, she felt greatly relieved. Of course, talking to Fang Hao was also about looking for a way out. She hadn't given up yet. She still had a chance before the conference. Feeling the massages on her shoulder, Rebecca closed her eyes as she enjoyed the caring touch of the man she adored. In this peaceful reliance, she paused for a while. Rebecca, with closed eyes, suddenly felt something unusual. She felt a strange sensation from her body. Looking down, she saw that Fang Hao's massaging hand had wandered down to her chest. And it was constantly shifting shapes. Rebecca bit her lower lip, struggling with the sensation. She immediately slapped Fang Hao's hand away. Her eyes slightly angry, Fang Hao, what are you doing? Fang Hao regretfully let go of her breast, and fibbed, nothing, that's how our massage goes, after finishing the shoulders, it naturally moves downwards. Fang Hao. Okay, no more fooling around. Let's chat and then go down for dinner together. Fang Hao sat down on a chair and pulled Rebecca into his arms with one swift motion. Her soft body felt like a large cotton ball in his arms. It was so comfortable that he almost let out a cry. They were in this position more or less before, so Rebecca could accept it. Chapter 712. Holding hands, they chatted for a while. After all, Fang Hao was young. With such a beautiful woman in his arms, his heart began to stir up again. He reached out, intending to remove Rebecca's long skirt. Seeing this, Rebecca quickly held down his hand, blushed, and said, "You're at it again. It's broad daylight. Have you gone mad?" This time, Rebecca's attitude was very different from before. It was not resistance and refusal, but a comment about the time of day. Fang Hao tentatively asked again, "What if I come tonight?" Well, Rebecca was much older than Fang Hao and knew what was going on. She was well aware of the matters between men and women. And her heart was greatly stirred by Fang Hao. Although she had always had an aversion to men in the past, she had accepted Fang Hao now, but she had not yet figured out what to do next. It was fine for them to touch and flirt with each other in the past, but when it came to living together, she was somewhat shy. Hesitating for a moment, she said softly, "Fang Hao, give me a little more time." Fang Hao nodded, knowing that there was no urgency in such matters. Rebecca's loyalty reached 98 points, he was not afraid of her running away, so there was no rush for a day or two. "Okay, I'll listen to you," Fang Hao said. But his hands still held her waist, and he asked softly, "So what do we do now? What should we do?" Fang Hao gave a sly grin. Then, pulling Rebecca's buttocks, he placed her whole body on the table. Rebecca was startled, her hands on the table, her face slightly panicked. "You?" Fang Hao's arms propped on either side of her, looking down at her. "Don't worry, just the usual things." Surprise appeared in Rebecca's eyes before she could answer. A heavy body pressed her underneath, and her lips were sealed. MMM. Frantic, Rebecca lightly patted Fang Hao's shoulder, trying to break free. However, after a few pats, her hands softened and wrapped around Fang Hao's neck, responding to him. Seeing Rebecca stop struggling, Fang Hao's hands slowly started to move towards her full bosom and stayed there without moving. MMM. Rebecca sensed his little movement and a hint of anger flashed in her eyes. But in this position, it was hard to dodge. After twisting a bit, she gave up dodging, simply closed her eyes, pretending not to care. Seeing that Rebecca didn't resist, Fang Hao increased the pressure on his hands. Needing the roundness in his palm, he molded it flat. Outside the window, dusk was painting the sky red. Inside the room, their breathing erratic. After quite a while, Rebecca felt something was poking her thigh persistently. She reached out to feel it, her expression changed instantly and she quickly withdrew her hand. She knew they couldn't go on like this. She turned her head away, saying, "That's enough, it's time to eat. If you keep on fooling around, I'll be angry." Dusk had settled. The commercial street in Silver Wing City was even busier. At the window on the second floor of a tavern, Sander stared in the direction of the city gate. Next to him stood a subordinate. With a worried look on his face, he hesitated before saying, "Boss, over 300 of our men went out. They should have completed the task and come back by now. But none of them have returned, and there's no response through the sound-transmitting shell. This is..." Sander felt an unease in his heart, his fingers tapping incessantly on the window ledge. The intelligence reported they were just over 100, most of them mere militiamen. Even if there was a problem, over 300 of our men can't just disappear. Something must have happened. That was true. Even if the ambush failed, out of 300 men, a few should have made it back. But now, a day and a night had passed. There was no news at all. Thump, thump, thump. As they were talking, the sound of hurried footsteps climbing the stairs echoed from outside. Soon, the footsteps stopped right outside the room. "Commander, there's news." Sander perked up, sat back at the table, returning to his composed mercenary commander demeanor. "Come in." The door opened, and a travel-worn young man walked in. After a slight bow, he said, "Commander, we found our comrades' bodies. They're all dead." Crack! The water glass in Sander's hand plummeted to the floor, shattering into pieces. Even though he'd considered the possibility of something going wrong, he hadn't expected the worst-case scenario. That was more than 300 of them, all gone just like that? "Are you sure?" "You didn't see wrong," said Sander, his voice raised somewhat. The underling, who had been asked to fetch some information, trembled before speaking quickly, "Chief, I'm sure, I know all the people in our group." Boom! Sander slammed his fist on the table, shattering it instantly. He roared, "Damn it! Damn it!" Like an enraged bear, he turned over all the objects in the room. After a flurry of smashing and cursing, he finally looked at his underling again and asked coldly, "Did that kid's team come back?" "Yes, they did. Not only did his team return, but even Li Rong's people have safely entered the city." "Damn, that bitch Li Rong. It must have been her messing around. Otherwise, how could a group of just 50 people be safe?" Sander's face was distorted with rage. Their ambush target had been the pretty boy from Lyss City. He had brought only 50 people with him, and didn't have any ties here. The fact that over 300 of his own men had been killed outside, it seemed obvious that it must have been Li Rong's doing. That woman had been discussing a business deal with him just a few days before. Then, she had played him like a fool. "Chief, what should we do now? Are we still going to kill the pretty boy?" his underling asked him again. Sander took several deep breaths, forcibly suppressing his rage. At the moment, he hated Li Rong more than the pretty boy. After a pause, he said, "Our brothers didn't die for nothing. Prepare everything. Tonight, we will send a big gift to Fairy Dream Tower." "Understood, Chief." Night fell off. The bustling Silver Wing City had also reached the moment of lights out. The busy people had already gone back to their rooms to rest. In their room, Fang Hao was playing chess with Angia. Lori examined the current game situation to help Angia. The two of them occasionally whispered to each other, careful not to miss any moves and allow Fang Hao to take advantage. After discussing for a while, Angia reached for a piece, pinching it between two fingers, preparing to make her move. Halfway, she raised her head to glance at Fang Hao's face. Seeing Fang Hao with no expression, she briskly put down her piece on the chessboard. No going back after placing your move, think carefully. Fang Hao said. Angia looked puzzled for a moment as she turned to look at Lori. Then, with a determined tone, she said, "Ha! Who are you trying to fool? With your petty tricks, you still want to scare us?" "Exactly. Who are you scaring?" Fang Hao shrugged. Picking up a piece, he placed it on the chessboard making a line of 5. Angia was stunned and then her face turned red with rage, and she reached out to flip the table. Fang Hao caught her wrist. "Hey, it's not that serious." "Ah," Angia was about to say something. She suddenly stopped and sniffed. Lori at her side did the same. Then they both looked out the window. They could see a tower of fire reaching into the night sky at the far end of the city. Even from a distance, they could see the flames leaping into the sky and smoke obscuring the heavens. "It's in the commercial district. Why is such a big fire there?" Angia and Lori were a bit shocked. In the orc tribe, such a big fire would likely not be fought. The clan leader would just lead his people to move away. Stomp stomp stomp. Footsteps sounded. Rebecca came in with a maid. "There's a fire outside," Rebecca just started her sentence, when she noticed the two standing by the window, and Lori crouched on the windowsill. All were staring at the fire. Rebecca joined them and, after a moment of thought, asked, "Should we go check it out?" Fang Hao shook his head, "No need. Someone will handle the fire soon. If we go now, whether we can help or not is one thing. But we might even be suspected of arson. Such a big fire, I'm afraid a whole street might be engulfed," said Rebecca, shaking her head. She knew very well how costly urban construction could be. Probably not. Silverwing City couldn't possibly not be able to handle a single fire. "It's not like we're in some remote place," Fang Hao said softly. As expected. Right after Fang Hao finished his sentence, a thunderous noise sounded from the clear night sky. Then, swirling dark clouds covered the entire area above the commercial district. Whoosh! Then, a torrential rain began to pour. The water mage had made his move. Chapter 713. The major fire that had engulfed the commercial street had subsided by the latter part of the night. But the aftershock of the fire was still felt deeply. A great number of people in the city were cleaning up the ruins. Some dressed like guards were investigating the cause of the incident. After breakfast, Fang Hao had brought Angia and a few others to check on the situation. Upon arrival at the site, they found it swarming with people. They gathered around discussing things like someone set the fire, whose family had been reduced to ashes, and so on. In essence, all chatter revolved around the fire from the previous night. Fang Hao and his group, who were strong and formidable, pushed through the crowd. They observed the whole street. The traces of the fire stretched beyond 1 or 2 buildings. At a single glance, one could see an entire row of structures, all blackened from the flame, some still releasing wisps of smoke. A few individuals clad in yellow were handling the areas that were still smoking. Thankfully, a mage had summoned a heavy rain last night, or the fire might have destroyed half the city. Looking at the scene, Fang Hao was suddenly reminded of Li Rong. He didn't know many people here, but he did know Li Rong. Her shop was right on this street. With that thought, he sidled through the crowd, heading towards the Fairy Dream Tower. The further inside they went, the worse the fire damage appeared. It seemed that the fire had originated from the Fairy Dream Tower and gradually spread to the other stores. There was nothing left in its wake. Naturally, there was no need for a door anymore. They climbed over the collapsed walls and entered. The inside was a mess. There were no cosmetics, clothing, jewelry left, absolutely nothing. Just as Fang Hao was about to take out the Book of Lords to inquire after Li Rong's situation, he faintly heard someone sobbing from within the ruins. The sobs were not loud, as though the person was struggling to control them. But from the slightly hoarse and trembling crying, one could perceive the person's sorrow. Fang Hao and his companions walked over the collapsed walls. They saw Li Rong, covered head to toe in soot, crouched in a corner. Her head was buried in her arms, her body quaking uncontrollably. Hearing someone come in, Li Rong quickly wiped away her tears and looked up. Her tear-streaked face looked like she had been crying her heart out. Upon seeing Fang Hao, she who had been suppressing her tears could no longer control herself and started crying again. Fang Hao could understand her grief. After striving for such a long time, she thought everything was on the right track. But one fire had stripped her of everything. Second outlet, business operations all were lost. Razed to the ground by the fire. After thinking for a moment, Fang Hao squatted down and gently patted her trembling shoulder. He softly comforted, "It's okay, everything will get better." Upon hearing his words, Li Rong turned around and threw herself into Fang Hao's arms, crying even harder. She wetted Fang Hao's clothes. "Everything is gone, it's all gone," Li Rong sobbed. Li Rong, who had her own territory, did not stay in the city at night. Last night she had heard the thunder but was unaware of the fire. But as soon as she entered the city today, she felt something was amiss. On seeing the fairy dream tower reduced to rubble, Li Rong was dumbstruck. Her mind went blank. She had rushed in alone, digging through the rubble, searching for her goods. But of course, after such a big fire, nothing could have survived. All she could find was charred remains. At this moment, she buried herself in Fang Hao's arms. She was sobbing uncontrollably, mumbling incoherently about everything being gone. Fang Hao had heard of Li Rong's business dreams, and he knew how heartbreaking it was to see those dreams shatter and lose everything. He continued to softly pat her shoulder, comforting her, "You still have your factory, your foundation is still there, everything can start again." "Woohoo!" Li Rong cried for a good while and then gradually quieted down. She wiped her tears off her face and raised her head from Fang Hao's chest. Her once pretty face was now a mess of tears and soot, making Li Rong look like she had come out of the fire. "Wipe your face, you look like a grimy kitten," Fang Hao handed over a handkerchief. Li Rong took it. She wiped her face, spreading the soot everywhere. Seeing her a bit more settled, Fang Hao asked, "Did anyone get hurt?" Li Rong appeared somewhat dazed, her face was devoid of its previous cheerfulness. Responding in a low voice, "No, we don't have anyone staying at the shop overnight, it's just that my shop, it's gone. It's all right, we can rebuild it later." "It's good that no one got hurt." Fang Hao noticed her face becoming increasingly smeared. He took out some water, wet the handkerchief, and wiped her face, revealing the fair complexion underneath the layer of soot. "Hey!" At this moment, Angia suddenly gave an exclamation. He reached his hand into the rubble and pulled out a long iron box. Li Rong, with tears in her eyes, turned to look at the iron box in Angia's hand. Her crying ceased immediately and she ran over hastily. Taking the box from Angia, she opened it to reveal neatly stacked piles of gold coins. This was the money earned from the shop's recent sales. Having money in her territory, Angia naturally didn't care much for this money. Angia's ability to find treasures was something that had always impressed Fang Hao. She could effortlessly find this money, which was nothing out of ordinary to him. Li Rong held the money box, taking deep breaths in order to compose herself. Chapter 714. When her emotions were back reasonably in control, she asked softly, "Fang Hao, Angia, why did you come here?" "We saw the great fire over here last night and came to check out your situation today," Fang Hao explained. The fire ignited in quite an odd way. Silverwing City is a grand city. According to the city levels, it is probably above level 15. The shops on the commercial street were all constructed of neatly cut stone bricks, which made it difficult to fuel such a large fire after closing shop. Luckily, a mage summoned heavy rain, otherwise, countless structures and people could have been destroyed. "Thank you all," Li Rong said gratefully. When the fire engulfed her place, the first ones to come were Fang Hao and his team with whom she once collaborated. "What's next?" Fang Hao was about to ask what to do next. But just as he began to speak, he heard a running footstep and a shouting voice from outside the courtyard, Sister Li, we got news." As the footsteps drew closer, some staff from Fairy Dream Tower came running in. Seeing Fang Hao and his team, the staff members stood still for a moment. "Boss, you are here too," one of the Transmigrator staff members recognized Fang Hao and still addressed him as boss. Though not sure why Fang Hao and others were here at this time. But now was not the time to question. Fang Hao nodded, After greeting, the staff member's attention returned to Li Rong. By now, Li Rong's tears had dried. Aside from her reddened eyes, no other expression could be seen. She regained her stern female boss persona, albeit somewhat withered. "What's wrong? You look fretful." Li Rong lit up a cigarette. "Sister Li, we just asked the patrolling guards, and they said we should think about who we may have offended. Last night's fire was arson," the male staff bluntly said. "Arson?" Li Rong's eyes hardened. As heartbroken as she had been, she was now equally enraged. All her possessions were destroyed, and it was targeted at her. Yes, the patrol team said our place was the origin of the fire. They also found traces of accelerants. They asked us to think about who might do this and then let them know, the male staff went on to say. The staff here were both transmigrators and native people. But the job was pretty good. There wasn't much hard labor, as they just had to sell goods and teach makeup tips to women every day. The income was quite substantial. This job could have been ongoing. They could, at least, get through this winter, and their families could have a decent life. But now, their jobs had been incinerated. Knowing that someone had done this, they felt the same rage. Li Rong nodded and said, "All right, I know. Look around here to see if there's anything worth taking." "Okay, boss." The staff started sorting through the ruins. The third floor was where the jade and jewelry were located. Angia managed to find something. They might also find some intact pieces. If they didn't search now, there would be nowhere to look when city cleaners arrived. Outside the ruins, Li Rong smoked her cigarette, pondering the situation. Fang Hao surveyed the scene and realized that Li Rong might not have a place to stay anymore. "Let's go," he suggested, "come to my place for now and get things sorted out. It's not too far from here. You can check easily if anything happens." Li Rong was discussing who started the fire. Hearing Fang Hao's words, she hesitated a little. Isn't it inappropriate?" Fang Hao knew what she was hesitating about. So he directly suggested, "The chaos here won't help you come up with anything. Let's go to my place, and you can think it over more calmly." This time, Li Rong did not refuse. Given her current situation, establishing a closer relationship with Fang Hao would indeed be beneficial. "Thank you, Big Boss Fang Hao." Fang Hao nodded, taking Li Rong towards his residence. The Lyss Army residency was allocated by the authorities. The building was massive with many vacant rooms. When Fang Hao and others returned, he asked someone to help Li Rong with a hot bath. Currently, she resembled a little African child just returned from Congo. After asking someone to take care of Li Rong, Fang Hao went on to deal with his affairs. The meeting was getting closer and closer, and several small meetings were taking place in the days leading up to the official meeting. Rebecca had been going out every day, attending meetings and trying to ally with potential forces. Back in the room, the calling sound of the sound transmitting shell was coming from the storage space. On picking it up and looking, it was a message sent out by Rolina. Perhaps it's because Rolina usually has a fierce personality, and the fact that he started to pursue Rebecca. Seeing the message, he felt inexplicably nervous. He took out the sound transmitting shell and put it to his ear, immediately hearing Rolina's pleasant but emotionless voice. "Those rats have brought back news." Hearing these brief words, Fang Hao paused. "That fast?" Yesterday, Rebecca had mentioned the traders in Lyss City to him. After getting intimate with Rebecca, he returned to his room. He then used the sound transmitting shell to contact Rolina. Rolina was somewhat reluctant, and Fang Hao felt a bit guilty because of Rebecca. After discussing for a while and mentioning the fact this was to help Rebecca, Rolina finally agreed to investigate the matter of the traders. Fang Hao didn't really want her to investigate, humans doing such work would take too long. By the time they'd gather the evidence, the council would have concluded. What he wanted to find were the cranial rats from the underworld. The cranial rats possessed the largest intelligence network in Lyss City, even the faceless ones were achieved with the report by the cranial rats. Investigating some traders wasn't difficult. But he didn't expect it to be this fast. Fang Hao held the sound transmitting shell to his mouth and asked, "Who are they?" Soon, Rolina's voice echoed again, "A total of 14 people, 5 of whom have disappeared, and the others are already under my control." Good lord, so many people! This doesn't seem like bribery, but more like spies placed beforehand. "Those 5 people, who are they? I need a list." Fang Hao continued. "All right, Maid Stacy, Official Marcus." Rolina swiftly listed 5 names, ranging from Rebecca's maid to local officials. These people, after Rebecca left, disappeared under various pretexts. They probably already secretly arrived at Silverwing City, waiting to denounce Rebecca at the conference, catching her off guard. "Okay, I understand," Fang Hao replied. Just as he was about to put away the sound transmitting shell, he heard Rolina's voice again. Her tone was slightly cautious. Ahem. Is everything going smoothly on your side? Quite smooth. Once this matter is resolved, and the council concludes, I'll return. Fang Hao responded. Rebecca's fine, right? You haven't bullied her, have you? Rolina asked once again. He'd never heard Rolina speak in such a tone before. Under normal circumstances, Fang Hao might have joked around, but he didn't dare to do so now. In his mind, he even started picturing Rolina losing her mind when she found out about his situation with Rebecca upon his return. Now was not the time to think about this. If he delayed any longer, she might become suspicious. He brought the shell to his mouth and said, both of us are fine. Why would I bully her? I even bought you a gift. I'll give it to you when I return. Fine, I understand. Her voice returned to its usual cold indifference. Ending the conversation, Fang Hao opened the Book of Lords once again. He looked at Rolina's loyalty once more. Loyalty of the Beauty of the Lonely Knight Lorana and Tobias current loyalty 67. Well. Pretty good, it's already reached 67. She's unlikely to kill him. Fang Hao opened the door and walked out. The door to the room across from him opened at the same moment. Li Rong had come out after a shower. She was wearing a beige shirt and tight long pants. Her long and straight legs were tightly wrapped by her pants as she walked out. Her skin was already quite fair, and this outfit even seemed to change her aura. No longer the sharp and valiant businesswoman, she now looked more like a pure and beautiful young lady. She was wearing one of Angia's spare dresses. Although Angia was well built, her frame was a bit smaller. On Li Rong, the outfit was a tight fit around her breasts and waist. Lord Fang Hao. Have you figured out who is targeting you? Fang Hao inquired. A killing intent flickered in Li Rong's eyes. Yes. Chapter 715. On the other side. In a temporary conference hall. Before the official council begins, several small meetings are held each day. They are all about the federal plan for the coming year. At the end of the meeting, the members of the council began to leave in groups. Rebecca has few friends here, so naturally, there was no one to leave with her. At this moment, a figure approached. He sat down beside Rebecca, Mrs. Rebecca. Looking up, it was Tavek from Pruel City. Tavek was originally a cloth merchant in Pruel City and was later promoted to city lord by Fang Hao. This time, he also represented Pruel City at the council. However, in order to avoid suspicion, he did not meet with Fang Hao. If there was anything to report, it was done orally. City Lord Tavek, Rebecca greeted with a smile. Tavek nodded, cautiously looking around to see that no one was paying attention to them. Then he whispered, the church mentioned to me this time about the sightings of undead in the north. It seems the news has reached the church. The territory to the north of Pruel City was where Fang Hao was. Although most of the undead have been placed in the troop hiding cave, the Daughter of Earth Spirit still led the undead on patrols. Sometimes the residents and merchant convoys would encounter them. As long as they didn't attack indiscriminately or approach the city, they wouldn't be attacked by the undead. However, this information reaching the church would cause a lot of trouble. Rebecca also frowned and said, no one mentioned it at the meeting. Yes, the church privately reached out to me and inquired about the situation with the undead. The church is paying attention to that area. Although I had assured them that Pruel City is not threatened by the undead, by the sounds of it, the church is likely to establish a temple in Pruel next year, said Tavek. Pruel City is located on the northern border of 100 cities of human territory. And the location where Fang Hao City is situated, in itself belongs to an uninhabited area outside of human influence. If divided, it would belong to the orcs' territory. In the past, the city of Pruel was least developed and the church rarely paid any attention. It seems they are starting to pay attention this year. Yes, I will discuss this matter with Fang Hao when I return and see what he thinks, Rebecca whispered. As others passed by, Tavek changed the topic with a smile. I hope to be able to sell Pruel City's cloth in Lyss City next year. Certainly, I will arrange for someone to take care of the safety on the trade route. Once the passers-by left, Tavek continued, the church is also asking about the temple in Lyss City, with the aim of gathering information. Rebecca's face slightly stiffened, turning a few shades paler. She was uncertain about what had gone wrong with the temple, but it must have something to do with Fang Hao. After all, she knew well that Fang Hao had a great connection with the undead. Okay, I understand, I will be careful, said Rebecca. Tavek nodded, stood up and smiled, haha. I rely on you, Mrs. Rebecca, for our business next year. Rebecca smiled politely, of course. Then I'll excuse myself, said Tavek before turning and leaving. After Tavek left, Rebecca intended to leave as well. But before she could get up, a man dressed in noble garb strode towards her. Grote Marshall, the council representative for the 100 Cities Business Association. At the same time, he was the puppeteer behind the scenes leading to the current predicament faced by Rebecca and others. Grote approached with a smirk and a glass of wine. As though he had coincidentally stumbled upon Rebecca, he greeted, "Ah, Mrs. Rebecca, you haven't left yet. It's been quite some time since we last caught up." Looking at the man beaming with pride, Rebecca was filled with disgust. However, under the circumstances, she still kept to basic etiquette and slightly nodded in response. Grote maintained his smile, his eyes greedily sweeping over Rebecca's body. "Mrs. Rebecca, I heard that Lyss City is facing some trouble. If you consider us friends, you can talk to me. The Marshall clan might." Rebecca had no patience to put up with this pretense. She was perfectly clear about Grote's intention. The biggest threat to Lyss City was him. Now, saying these words was nothing more than a threat. Before he could finish, she interrupted him, "Thank you, but there's no need. Lyss City is doing just fine." At Rebecca's cold response, Grote's eyes twinkled with anticipation, and he said, "Ah. Mrs. Rebecca, I've received some news. After your departure, someone bribed people in Lyss City and received a great deal of internal information. I'm afraid by the time the official council begins, such information might be presented as evidence. Considering your current situation, this might affect your position." After a pause, his expression turned mocking, his gaze unabashedly focused on Rebecca's chest and lower abdomen, and he continued, "Actually, Rebecca, you know, we're old acquaintances. If you're in trouble, you can tell me. We can think of a solution together, plus our Marshall clan's connections, the problems are not hard to solve. If you don't mind, you can come over to my place for a drink, and we can discuss further." If she didn't know him, this spiel would sound like a friend offering to help. However, Olivia had already tipped Rebecca off a few days earlier. Chapter 716. I informed her of Grote's knowledge about the Lyss City situation. Rage was evident on Rebecca's face. She had grown to loathe this hypocritical and sly man who always pestered her. Before he could finish, she interrupted him again, "Mr. Grote, please leave. I have nothing to say to you." Rebecca's voice was loud, attracting the attention of the nearby council members. Their curious gazes fell upon her. However, seeing that it was Grote and Rebecca, they remained at a distance, showing no intention of intervening. With such a scene, Grote had no choice but to withdraw. After all, despite their underhandedness behind closed doors, the nobles still maintained an image of decency in public. Grote shrugged, a shadow passing over his eyes. Without hiding his disdain, he sneered, "Rebecca, I've given you the chance. It's you who refused it. I hope you won't kneel down and beg me for mercy later." He had desired this woman for a long time. Distinguished and elegant, she was more appealing than any woman he had possessed before. Conquering such a woman would bring him a great sense of accomplishment. Moreover, he was not in a hurry. He held evidence against Lyss City, reality would force her to submit to him. When the time came, he would crush the pride of the woman before him entirely. Rebecca was enraged at these words, her face red with fury. Even while trying to maintain her noble etiquette, her fingers tightened into a fist until they turned white. She wanted to say something. But without any allies here, any argument would only put her at a disadvantage. This negotiation was one where Grote had the upper hand. Meanwhile, a few male and female council members approached from a short distance away. These individuals had been keeping a watchful eye on them and were in league with Grote. "Ha ha, Mr. Grote, it seems Rebecca lady does not accept your kindness," a male council member, stroking his small mustache, smiled. "Yes, Grote, you can choose any beautiful woman in this city. Why be so obsessed with this outsider?" Another lavishly dressed elderly woman sneered. Grote discarded his previous sinister expression, revealing a friendly smile. "I just wanted to help an old friend who was in trouble. Since Rebecca knows what she's doing, I won't bother her anymore." Having said that, he laughed and joked with those next to him as he walked out. Even after Grote had left, Rebecca's expression was still full of rage. She sat in her chair, her face grim. Aseti, who was waiting outside the door, came in to investigate when she saw Rebecca did not come out after a long time. When she saw Rebecca sitting alone in the hall, she hurriedly went over. "Miss Rebecca, are you all right?" Aseti asked softly. Aseti was an orange hero, also a woman. Fang Hao had assigned her to Rebecca's side to ensure her safety. Hearing Aseti's voice, Rebecca came to her senses. "Nothing, let's go." Her face still held a smile, showing no signs of anything unusual. All she had just encountered seemed like it had never happened. "Oh, the carriage is ready, let's go back first." Aseti guided the way. "Okay." Rebecca rose, following Aseti out. For some reason, the moment Aseti's voice rang in her ears, all of Rebecca's worries disappeared, only one thought in her mind. She still had Fang Hao. He would handle all these matters. On the other side, Fang Hao returned to the room and gestured Li Rong to sit across him. Upon entering, he quickly smelled the fresh scent of a woman who had just taken a bath. He poured Li Rong a glass of fruit wine. He had casually asked earlier, never expecting Li Rong to figure out who started the fire while she was bathing. "Who?" A murderous look flashed in Li Rong's eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "Sander." Sander? Sander had frequently appeared in Fang Hao's sight recently. Earlier, upon their return from exploring the underground palace, their team was ambushed. It was Sander's men who did it. However, their team hadn't suffered any losses then, and because they were in Silverwing City, he hadn't taken immediate action against him. He hadn't expected Li Rong's initial suspicion to be him. "Are you sure?" Fang Hao was a bit skeptical. "Yes, I just received news that someone saw the arsonist. It's one of Sander's men." Li Rong's eyes were filled with anger. Li Rong held a high reputation among the Transmigrator group in Silverwing City. Although she didn't form any faction, if a representative were to be elected among the Transmigrators in Silverwing City, it would certainly be Li Rong. While Li Rong was showering, she received a message from others on the Book of Lords. Someone had seen one of Sander's men sneaking into the commercial street last night after the lights were off and the stores closed. Not long after that man came out, a fire broke out. The fire was enormous, illuminating the entire area brightly. With this comparison, coupled with the enmity between the two sides over the past few days, there was no need for doubt. It was definitely Sander's doing. Ordinary people wanting revenge wouldn't have been able to cause such a large fire. "What are you planning to do?" Fang Hao looked at Li Rong. Li Rong reached for her cigarettes. However, she realized she was now wearing Angia's clothes, thus she took the cup and drank some fruit wine. After a brief pause, she finally spoke, "Let's follow the rules, you pay for murder and for debts." Chapter 717. Upon hearing this, Fang Hao was taken aback. How did they end up resorting to underworld rules? "Do you have a plan?" Fang Hao continued to ask. Li Rong examined Fang Hao with her eyes and then softly said, "Boss Fang Hao, how much are you selling the gun you showed me last time?" The Lionheart Knights were equipped with bolt-action rifles. However, within Lyss City, they are all stored in Fang Hao's storage space. They would only be given out to the Lionheart Knights once they left the city. This was to prevent them from being traced back if bullets were found in any future events. Li Rong discovered that Fang Hao also had rifles. She was even more surprised and started browsing in Fang Hao's shop on his channel when she returned to her territory. She found that the items on sale were still the same old stuff and rifles were not being sold. "You want to kill him with the rifle?" Fang Hao guessed her thoughts. Li Rong, with a determined look on her face, said, "Yet. My followers are not ranked high. If it really comes to fighting, they may not be a match for him, so I want to buy a couple of guns and take him out directly." It was clear that Li Rong was serious this time. Fang Hao also wanted to kill Sander. However, he was always in the city and was even more adept at using the rules of Silverwing City. If conflicts occur in the city, it is highly possible that Sander will get away with it while Li Rong would be wanted by the city. By then, even her own city would be under attack from Silverwing City. Fang Hao thought for a while, feeling that Li Rong's approach was too impulsive. To kill him, there might be better ways. "Li Rong, I also want Sander dead, but we can't be rash in our actions. If Silverwing City discovers that your factions have fought, Sander can lead his people away. Your city is nearby, do you think you can get away?" Fang Hao advised softly. This, Li Rong was speechless after hearing this. She was ready to kill Sander no matter the cost after her shop was set on fire. But without guns from Fang Hao, she didn't even have a chance to do so. Just relying on her own men, they could only fight against the other side, and the chances of killing Sander are not high. I can't care about that anymore. If he doesn't die, how can I, Li Rong, continue my business? The transmigrators in the city don't have much status to begin with. If I can't settle this properly, my shop might be set on fire for a second time. Li Rong said angrily. Fang Hao shook his head, softly said, he certainly must die, as well as the people behind him. We just can't rush in and risk everything. Li Rong also knew that Fang Hao was right. But she was just too angry. She took a deep breath and then said, so, do you have a better plan? Fang Hao only has one approach to dealing with matters like this. And that is eliminating all future troubles. Sander definitely has to die, or else he was unsure what kind of troubles could arise. However, he is not familiar with Silverwing City. To kill Sander without anyone noticing, he still needs to do a detailed investigation. Do you know where Sander usually is? Fang Hao stroked his chin and asked softly. Li Rong shook her head and said, Dragon Tooth Pub. Fang Hao nodded, said, okay, I'll take care of this. When the time comes, I'll contact you through the Book of Lords. Don't come to Silverwing City in the next couple of days, in case Sander targets you. After a pause, Li Rong finally nodded, okay, I'll go back and wait for your news. She stood up, turned her gaze back to Fang Hao. She whispered, if you help me get rid of Sander, I'll accompany you for 3 days. Fang Hao was startled, and the water he had just sipped almost spat out. He said, oh. Both of these seem good only for you. Li Rong slapped the table with her slim white fingers, what do you mean, you are not interested in me? No, I'm just a kid, why are you telling me these things? Fang Hao laughed, and then continued, I think Sander will definitely hide. Let your men keep track of his whereabouts. No matter what, there is a great possibility that Sander will hide after everything. To find him, it would still take some time and effort. Okay, I'll let my people keep an eye on him. As soon as there's news, I'll inform you immediately. Li Rong also said seriously. Fang Hao nodded, and said to the door, arrange someone to escort Li Rong back. The door opened and, a guard politely said, Ms. Li Rong, please. Li Rong gave Fang Hao a serious look and then walked out of the room. Chapter 718. In the afternoon, Rebecca returned in a horse carriage. The two of them met at the staircase. It was clear that Rebecca was not in the best of spirits. Seeing Fang Hao, she said, come to my room, I have something to tell you. Oh, okay. Fang Hao nodded his head, following Rebecca into her room. Upon entering the room, the servants prepared fruit tea and pastries for them. Once everything was ready, they promptly left the room, even considerately shutting the door behind them. Fang Hao took his seat at the table without reservation, pulling Rebecca into his arms. The soft touch enveloped his thigh. Rebecca did not resist, merely sat there and placed a pastry from the table into her mouth. What happened with the fire? People still mentioned it today. Rebecca wrapped one arm around Fang Hao's shoulder. Do you remember Li Rong? Rebecca frowned in recollection, the transmigrator who tried to seduce you at Olivia's banquet. Fang Hao was at a loss for words, hearing the tone in Rebecca's voice, it was like a jealous wife. What seduction? We just discussed a potential collaboration to explore the underground palace. Humph. I saw clearly from the second floor that day, when she came to find you, she purposely pulled her collar lower. Don't tell me you didn't notice. I really didn't, all the affluent women at the banquet had low necklines, it was all white as far as I could see, how would I notice how low hers was? You. Rebecca, irritated, pinched his waist. Fang Hao didn't really mind, especially since she didn't pinch hard. He tightened his hold on the woman in his arms, smiling and said jealous? Nothing's going on between us, don't overthink it. Rebecca glared at Fang Hao, who's jealous, I was just advising you to be mindful. There are already plenty of people around you. In this era, it was an unspoken rule that the powerful have more resources. Which of those noble lords didn't have countless women revolving around them? And sometimes, this was even used as a boast to discuss during idle chats. Similarly, as long as a woman had status, she could also keep a group of handsome younger men. Rebecca furrowed her brows, feeling that her words and actions today were a little out of character. Although she did not mind being intimate with Fang Hao, she definitely wouldn't be jealous. Why would she care whether other women were trying to seduce Fang Hao? After all, she quite liked women too. After some thought, she felt it might be because their relationship was getting closer and by name, they were already husband and wife. If he was flirting around in public, it would seem like he didn't see her as worth considering. Having figured this out, she no longer felt like pursuing this topic. The topic shifted to today's council meeting. Tevek asked me to notify you, the people from the church, they've noticed the appearance of the undead to the north of Pruel City. What did he say? Fang Hao became serious. In fact, it was hard to hide the presence of the undead. But the news reaching Silverwing City still surprised him. Tevek said the church privately approached him, asking about the undead activity to the north, and planned to establish a temple in Pruel City after winter. Rebecca said softly. The church doesn't know that's my city, right? They don't. If the church had evidence linking you to the undead with their domineering attitude, they would probably have started arresting people by now. Rebecca replied. In fact, someone in the church already knew. The transmigrator, Mazi, was aware of his connection with the undead. But such a thing was hard to use as evidence. That's good, we'll consider establishing the temple in Pruel City after winter. After some thought, Fang Hao said. Whether the temple could be established was still a difficult question to answer. Since the other party hasn't made a move, there's no need for him to be overly suspicious yet. Rebecca nodded, then continued, Grote insinuated something to me today when he came over. Looking at his self-confident attitude, I worry he has gathered some evidence about Lyss City. He said that if I reconsider, I should go to his residence. Upon hearing Grote's name, Fang Hao felt a deep loathing. He really was ubiquitous. This lecherous old man is really persistent. Fang Hao gripped Rebecca's soft hand, and continued, Today, Rolina passed along a message. She found a total of 14 people planted around you, they. So many. Rebecca was startled, abruptly interrupting Fang Hao's words. She knew there must be some people planted around her. But she hadn't expected there to be so many. Fang Hao nodded and continued, Rolina has already captured most of them. Now there are only 5 left who can't be located, they have likely already reached Silverwing City. Next, Fang Hao informed Rebecca of the names and positions of those 5 people. Having heard the full information, Rebecca's expression turned even more grim. The identities of these 5 people were all very important, naturally, they were also people she used to trust. But now they had all betrayed her. So, what should we do? Rebecca was somewhat flustered again. While these people remained in Lyss City, she had ways to deal with them. But once they reached Silverwing City, she didn't really have any good solutions. It's fine, I already have a preliminary idea in my mind, just need to refine it. All you need to do is attend the council meetings as usual for the next several days. Fang Hao reassured her in a soothing tone. Considering that the council meeting was about to start, the time left for them to prepare was also not much. Chapter 719. He plans to perfect his strategy before the council meeting. So that Grote would have no chance to implicate Rebecca. Rebecca nodded, all right, it's up to you now. The two of them interacted at length in the room. Only when the maid knocked to announce that the bath water was ready did Rebecca push him away. She rearranged herself and left the room. Time flew by. The day of the official start of the council was tomorrow. On the main road leading to the city's central hall, the flags of the Human Federation and the blue and silver flags of Silverwing City were hung. The entire city was bustling, preparing for the most important 100 Cities Conference of the year. Compared to the bustling Silverwing City, the temporary residence at Lyss City was enveloped in a gloomy atmosphere. First thing in the morning, Rebecca left with a worried look on her face. Inside the room on the 3rd floor, Fang Hao sat at the table, listening to his subordinates' reports. For the past few days, he had placed many spies in the city, using various methods to investigate Sander and Grote's intelligence. But they had no roots in Silverwing City. Although many people were sent out and a lot of money was spent, they still didn't obtain any useful information. He regretted not bringing the cranial rats with him. Those little guys couldn't do much, but they were top-notch at eavesdropping on human conversations. After everyone finished their reports without any useful information, Fang Hao waved his hand, telling everyone to go back for a meal and rest. He would think of another way. Tomorrow is the start of the council meeting, no matter what, they can't let Grote show the evidence from Lyss City. Otherwise, both he and Rebecca will be put in danger. Well, I know where Grote is staying. If nothing else works out, I can only send him to meet the Grim Reaper. The original plan was to eliminate the witnesses who came from Lyss City and destroy the evidence. Once the Lyss City delegation left Silverwing City, Grote would be assassinated at the right time. But now this plan is difficult to carry out. If all else fails, he would just have to kill him directly. After the murder, a fire would be started. Ideally, even the evidence should be burned. Just as Fang Hao was planning to take a huge risk that night. The Book of Lords suddenly sounded an alert for a private chat. Looking through it, it was a message from Li Rong. Fang Hao, I have news about Sander. After the last big fire, everyone was looking for Sander. But these days, Sander seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Unexpectedly, Li Rong now has news about Sander. Where is he? Fang Hao asked. Li Rong replied, I am not sure about his current location, but I have intel that he will be smuggling some people into the city before the city gates close today. This is our good chance for revenge. Upon seeing this message, Fang Hao furrowed his brow. Smuggler people into the city? After pondering, Fang Hao continued to ask, which important person is he smuggling and what type of people into the city? Li Rong replied, it should be some city's noblemen. If they are getting Sander to do things for them, it must be something shady. I am not sure who they are smuggling. Boss Fang Hao, you must help me. I will agree to whatever terms you have if he dies. Ignoring the hint hidden in her message, Fang Hao was considering the intelligence mentioned by Li Rong. Sander had always been Grote's henchman. This time, sneaking people into the city, could they be those 5 people who escaped from Lyss City? He had assigned a large number of people these past few days and couldn't find these 5 people. It would actually make sense if Grote had kept these 5 people outside the city this whole time. They have no knowledge of Silverwing City, any nearby small city or even a manor would make a suitable place to hide them. Even if he had arranged for people to search, they wouldn't be able to find any trace of them outside the city. Fang Hao? Are you there? If you don't help me, my business will really be ruined. You must help me, please. I, Li Rong, will definitely be grateful. Seeing that Fang Hao didn't respond, Li Rong seemed a bit anxious. There was a pleading tone in her voice. Even if Fang Hao made some excessive demands now, Li Rong would most likely agree without hesitation. In fact, Li Rong's character is quite okay. Aside from always hinting some things to him, she's actually quite a responsible and strong woman. What are the details of the time and place when Sander is bringing these people into the city? Fang Hao continued to ask. Perhaps his plan could still be executed. Killing a thug with a criminal record is definitely less conspicuous than killing a would-be council member. Even if Sander dies, it wouldn't make a big fuss in the city. According to the intel, it's at dusk by the North Gate, the exact time, and identities are unclear. I have already arranged for people to stake out there. It's still morning, but she has already positioned people for the stakeout. Women really do hold grudges. All right, I understand. Keep yourself in the city and don't visit, so we won't trace the death back to you when the time comes, Fang Hao instructed. Okay, thanks, Fang Hao. If Sander dies, I'll accompany you for 5 days. No need, try someone else. No, my mistake. Fang Hao thought for a second and continued, if you really want to thank me, you can help me with something. Damn, I've given you a person, isn't that enough? Why are you so clueless? Li Rong sent another message, the words bristling with complaints. Li Rong, you're a beautiful woman, go find a man. The nobles in the city are all at your beck and call, Fang Hao said helplessly. Li Rong was always too assertive in her words and actions. Usually, he was the one to flirt with the ladies around him, but in the presence of Li Rong, he would end up sweating after a few words. He didn't even know what to say. I want to choose you. I won't hold it against you, what are you afraid of? Li Rong said again. I'm afraid of you. Now, I need to set up for Sander's plan. I won't chat for now. Okay, make sure to keep me updated. The two ended their chat. Fang Hao immediately asked to set up people to stake out the North Gate. This was his last chance. If there were no follow-up plans regarding Sander, Fang Hao would have no choice but to order an assassination on Grote. The evening haze was thick and painted the sky crimson. The north gate was unusually bustling today. It seemed there were more people than usual, people even set up stalls by the gate. They were hawking loudly. At a grocery stall somewhat close by, the vendor was wiping his nose while loudly advertising his merchandise. There were quite a lot of people here and someone would often ask about the price. And every time, they would curse the hawker for being greedy before turning to leave. The vendor didn't mind, he just smirked in response to the curses. He didn't say anything. This time, a man, clothed like a beggar, came over and squatted down, gnawing on a piece of bread. The two sat together, looking like two bored people having a chat. The beggar asked in a low voice, "How is it?" The vendor replied, "I didn't see anyone. The business is good, I doubled the prices, otherwise I'd be out of stock." The beggar took another 2 bites of his bread. "Enough, this is the 6th piece of bread I've eaten, I'm afraid I won't be able to shit it out later." He didn't know what was up. There were quite a lot of good Samaritans today, always throwing him some money or buying him some bread. He was so fed up with eating bread, he felt like throwing up. He probably wouldn't want to eat bread for a year. The stall owner gave a small smile, he was quite lucky in comparison. He whispered consolingly, "Just hang in there, they are about to close the city gates, and if no one shows up, we can go home." These guys had all seen the images of the 5 people who had escaped from Lyss City, as well as Sander's image. Even if they disguise themselves when entering the city, with over a dozen eyes watching, no one can slip through. As long as they dare to enter the city, they have confidence that they can recognize them. And it was close to the time when the city gates close. At this time, the residents who have been out for work would start to return back, and the people entering the city will be the most. The two were chatting leisurely. The old beggar's gaze suddenly focused on a man and woman at the city gate. These two were dressed as ordinary people, but he recognized them, they were the targets of this operation. His heart was overjoyed, but his face didn't reveal anything abnormal. He stood up, the stick in his hand knocked against a stone wall on the side, as if he wanted to knock off the dirt on it. With those few knocks, numerous eyes turned towards the city gate. Chapter 720. With the beggars knocking, the noisy North City gate fell into a seemingly frozen 2-second silence, only to plunge back into the chaos immediately afterward. The sounds of vendors hawking and beggars pleading were incessant. However, these minute changes failed to attract the attention of the crowd. The city gate was crowded with people struggling to enter the city. The stationed guards were keeping order while grumbling and swearing. Split among the crowd were 5 people who managed to enter the city one after another. Under the watchful eyes of many, the 5 people gathered at a nearby stall. The stall owner, a middle-aged man dressed shabbily, glanced at the 5 and nodded slightly, "All present." The 5 who entered the city one after another recognized each other. They looked at each other and nodded in response. The middle-aged stall owner glanced around before continuing, "Something's off today. So many merchants have suddenly shown up at the north gate. Let's take a detour." He had a feeling. Today, the north gate had seen many unfamiliar faces. He had no idea if this had anything to do with their task, but it felt abnormal. Rolling up the food spread out on his mat, he picked it up and started to move further into the city. The 5 followed behind him silently. "Ha!" The guard stationed at the city gate yawned out of boredom. He subconsciously cast a look back, and was slightly taken aback. His companion, observing him stare behind, also followed his gaze but found nothing unusual. "What is it?" "Checking out a woman." Coming back to reality, the guard frowned, "Why has it suddenly become so quiet?" His companion also looked back. Indeed, the location which was bustling just moments ago. The stalls were packed up and the beggars were nowhere to be seen. It had suddenly become eerily quiet. Who cares? It's better that the clamoring crowd has left. Too many people cause trouble. True. Inside the room, Rebecca, Fang Hao and other heroes were all silently waiting. Everyone was gathered in the room. It was as silent as death. Fang Hao would glance at the gold watch on his wrist from time to time, calculating the time until the city gates were to be closed. Rebecca at his side seemed even more tense. Her fingers were tightly clasped, with her knuckles turning white from the pressure. If no information came before the city gate was closed, Fang Hao would have to implement his previous plan. He would have to kill Grote directly, silencing him once and for all. The room was eerily silent, everyone quietly waiting. After some time had passed, the guard's voice came from outside the door. Soon, the door was knocked. "Sir, there's news from the North City Gate." The intense silence in the room seemed to be broken by this news. "Come in." The door opened, and a Lionheart knight, disguised as a small vendor, strode in. After he slightly bowed, he opened his mouth to say, "Sir, we found the people from the portraits at the North City Gate. There are a total of 5 people, led by a man dressed as a peddler. They are heading towards the city center. Our men are tracking them." Fang Hao immediately stood up. "Let's go. Take me there." "Yes, sir." Fang Hao led the others straight out of the room. Residential area in the northern part of the city. Inside an inconspicuous civilian residence. With a list in his hand, Sander began to verify the identities of the 5 people before him. Though he did not know who these people were, and why they had to sneak into the city. But based on their demeanor and appearance, they were clearly not ordinary civilians but more akin to nobility. Add to that, these 5 people were guests of his master. He acted very humbly, not daring to display his typical thuggish superior attitude. Cough cough. Clearing his throat lightly, Sander managed to show a smile. He said, "Gentlemen, I have prepared clothes for you. Change into these clothes. Outside, there is a carriage waiting to take you to the master's place." The 5 didn't say much. Each of them started changing into the clothes prepared by Sander. Just as the 5 had changed their clothes and were about to follow Sander out, the curses of Sander's underling were suddenly heard from outside. "You folks there, what's your business here? Move aside." Recently, Sander had suffered a heavy loss. So he had recruited a new group of people. But these people were far inferior to the previous mercenaries and could at best pass for local hooligans. Hearing the cursing outside, Sander stopped in his tracks. The other 5 also were alert and stopped as well. Then, they heard a series of dull thudding sounds from outside. Sander's face changed. He recognized that sound too well. It was the sound of a blade penetrating flesh. He knew that something was wrong. Moreover, the other party seemed determined to kill them, otherwise, who would dare to kill people in Silverwing City? Creak. Just as he pulled out the dagger from his waist, the door was already pushed open. Several figures entered one by one, dragging their fallen prey into the room. These people were all dressed differently, some like street vendors, some scruffy like beggars. But Sander didn't recognize any of them. He was also sure that none of them were his enemies. "Brothers, could there be some misunderstanding here? I understand the rules. I will give you money, just spare us." Speaking, Sander threw his weapon to one side. From under the bed, he pulled a wooden box. Carefully he managed to open the lid, revealing the luminescent gold coins inside. Though it was a small box for an ordinary civilian or even some petty nobles in the city, it was a considerable amount of money. However, the men didn't even glance at the box, their gaze still remained on the 6 people. Chapter 721. "Are you Sander?" A shiver went down Sander's spine. "They've come for me." What do you want from me?" Sander asked cautiously. "As long as you are here, just wait." "What?" The 6 people didn't know why they were there, they could only wait quietly. Soon, footsteps came from outside the room. The door opened again. A pair of young men and women, dressed up as commoners and hiding their faces, walked in. "My lord." The people in the room immediately kowtowed. The young man nodded. He unwrapped his scarf, revealing his face. Bang! 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 Except for Sander, the other 5 people were stunned at the sight of the young man's face. Their faces changed drastically, and they could not help retreating several steps automatically. Nearly immediately after, they fell on the ground with a thud. Pleading immediately, "City! City Lord, we had no choice." "Shh, don't shout, be quiet." The newcomers were Fang Hao and Anjia in disguise. Although Sander had laid many ambushes for him, he had never seen Fang Hao himself. On the contrary, the others, being officials and mates of Lyss City, recognized Fang Hao at a glance. They were all clear about why they were here. And it was not difficult to guess why Fang Hao appeared here with his troops. Sander frowned in thought. City Lord? These 5 people were calling this young man a city lord. Such a young city lord. Recently, city lords from all over were attending the federal conference in Silver Wing City. Which city was he from? When the 5 people shut their mouths and knelt fearfully off to the side, Fang Hao's gaze fell on the contemplative Sander first. My name is Fang Hao. I came with the team from Lyss City. You should know who I am. Sander's pupils rapidly contracted as he swallowed unconsciously. It's him. No, I don't know you, sir. Do you know me? Sander tried his best to appear as puzzled as possible. But his acting was too amateurish and looked fake. Grote had you ambush me so many times, you can't possibly not know who I am. Fang Hao sat down on the wooden chair nearby. Sander's face turned solemn, but he only now realized that his employer was named Grote. Previously, there had always been an old man who contacted them, assigned them tasks and paid them handsomely. Observing the young man in front of him, who seemed to know everything, even more than he himself knew, continuing to pretend seemed pointless. He also knelt down immediately, begging, Sir, please spare me, I won't dare to do it again, I won't. Fang Hao smiled and continued to ask, Where did Grote ask you to take these people? Sander answered promptly. Sir, I'm not sure if the man giving us our assignment was Grote. But our current task was to deliver these 5 people to mansion number 36 in the central district. You have never seen Grote? No, not true. It's always been an old man who delivers the messages. Sander answered immediately. Fang Hao nodded. This Grote wasn't too stupid. If it wasn't for the news from Grote that I'd received from the Life-Taker camp, even if we captured Sander, we wouldn't be able to confirm Grote was behind the plots against me. After a thought, Fang Hao continued to ask, What assignment did the old man give you? It was just to pick these people up and send them to a specified location. Nothing else. Sander was very cooperative. Whatever Fang Hao asked, he thought for a while and then answered honestly. Mainly, other than the task given to Sander, there really wasn't any other information available. After finishing with Sander, Fang Hao's gaze fell back on the other 5. Among the 5, he was most familiar with one of the women. She was under 20 years old and used to be a maid of Rebecca. During several transfers, she was the one waiting in the hall for him to transport over, leading him to meet Rebecca. Who would have thought she would end up here, betraying Lyss City? Acting as a witness, she appeared here. What happened? Fang Hao turned his gaze towards the pale-faced maid. Hearing Fang Hao's question, the maid broke down into tears. Fearing that the sound would be too loud, Fang Hao immediately directed someone to cover her mouth and pulled her to one side to question later. His gaze then landed on the remaining people. He said quietly, You have had a tough journey coming all this way. None of the remaining 4 answered. One middle-aged man gave Fang Hao a slight glance. He spoke, Ask what you want to ask, we will tell you everything. Just don't kill us. This man was the Minister of Internal Affairs, a very important official in Lyss City. Similarly, he knew more of Lyss City's secrets. Just now, Fang Hao had even said Grote's name, which meant that he was already very clear about their side of the story. He also knew about the secret of the 5 of them sneaking to the Silver Wing City. Continuing to deny would be meaningless, it would be better to take the chance and plead for their lives. The minister thought well, but Fang Hao didn't really have anything good to ask. He just needed to make sure that they wouldn't show up at the conference tomorrow, then he would have completed his task. After thinking for a bit, he still asked, What benefits did Grote promise you? The remaining 4 started murmuring their complaints one after another, talking about how Grote forced them, so they had no choice but to betray Lyss City and travel all the way here. Of course, Fang Hao didn't believe a word of their narrative. Chapter 722. These people were all cunning, seasoned veterans, no one could force them to do anything they didn't want to do. They only came because they were promised greater benefits than what Lyss City offered. He dismissed the men's pleas with a wave of his hand and turned his gaze to the maid behind them. Compared to these old fellows, seeing this maid surprised Fang Hao. When Fang Hao first met her, she was a simple, unpretentious girl with a charming smile. He didn't know why she ended up here. Stacy, why are you here? Tell me. Fang Hao shifted his gaze back to the maid. When Fang Hao mentioned the name Stacy, Rebecca didn't believe it. She said that she had bought Stacy when she was very young. Stacy had always been obedient and well-behaved and would never betray her. But it seems that Rebecca was mistaken. Stacy's presence here spoke volumes. The maid turned ashen, clenching her jaw in prolonged silence before finally divulging her story. Being of humble birth, she naturally wouldn't have had the chance to interact with the likes of Grote. The last time, when Hubert and Grote went to Lyss City. During their stay in the city, she accidentally shattered one of Hubert's belongings and was ordered to compensate for it. It was then that Grote defended her, paying a hefty sum as compensation. Stacy was grateful to Grote. Combining Grote's cunning manipulation of women, he ended up becoming intimate with her. Afterwards, Grote used her to identify Rebecca. He lavished her with noble luxuries and exerted pressure through his own status. Eventually, he persuaded her. Shortly after Rebecca's departure, she followed the Minister of Internal Affairs here. Everything unfolded like an old-fashioned soap opera. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "I'm so sorry," Stacy said. All the maids around Rebecca possessed some basis of knowledge. Once they calmed down, they realized that Grote was using her, and whether she would survive afterward was uncertain. But by then, she was already in too deep with no way out. A seasoned noble like Grote. Luring a girl under 20 was just too easy for him. The whole thing about compensating for Hubert's expensive item was just part of a staged performance. She had ultimately fallen into their trap. But in this era, it seemed there was nothing a servant like her could do. If a noble wished to kill you, he might not even bother seeking an excuse. After hearing her reasons, Fang Hao glanced at his wristwatch. It was 10:20 at night. He shot a glance at the Lionheart Knights nearby. Everyone understood the gesture. Plop, plop. Their mouths were covered, their throats slit. Stacy, terrified, stumbled and collapsed onto the ground. She wanted to scream but couldn't muster the courage to. Hugging her head with her arms, she trembled. How Stacy would be dealt with now that she had been brought to Rebecca was not his concern. The remaining individuals gradually ran out of energy, struggling and whining in fear. A sickening scent of fresh blood permeated the room as the struggling slowly came to an end. Fang Hao casually put a box of gold coins into his storage space, saying, "Bury the bodies in this room. When you leave, make sure no one sees you." "Yes, sir." Everyone began to dig in the room. Meanwhile, Fang Hao led Angia and the somewhat limp maid out of the civilian district. 11 o'clock at night. The core area of Silver Wing City. This was the city's famous noble district, where property could not simply be bought with money. If you wanted to live here, aside from an astronomical price, you needed a certain status. A mansion. Inside the luxurious hall, the floor was covered with a extravagant carpet, and a grand nightstone chandelier lit up the room brightly. In the middle of the room was a colossal table, on which sat glasses of wine steeped with unknown substance. Grote sat quietly at the table. While sipping his wine, he locked his gaze on the woman in the middle of the room, standing barefoot on the opulent carpet. The woman had long black hair and wore a white gauze gown. She danced barefoot on the carpet. Her obscure parts, hidden beneath the gauze, would fleetingly appear as she danced. Her movements were tantalizing, her allure was incessantly tantalizing the man's libido. Grote swirled his wine glass, his eyes fixated hungrily on the woman who danced before him, his yearning evident in his eyes. He took a big gulp. Strip. Chapter 723. Grote was in a fine mood today. His plan was progressing very smoothly. An hour ago, the butler had passed the news on to him. The mercenaries they had hired had already been met by people from inside the city and would be brought here after their identities were confirmed. Then, with Rebecca stripped of her current status, he would naturally have ways to deal with her. The thought of being able to take revenge on Rebecca set his heart aflame. Watching the woman dancing sensually before him, the desire in his eyes intensified. "Undress," Grote ordered. The woman had been bought with a hefty sum, as the price of a transmigrator wasn't cheap. Especially, a young, beautiful one with unique skills. The woman dancing on the carpet frowned at his words but seemingly chose to ignore it, continuing to dance silently. Bang! The wine glass collided heavily with the table. "Undress for me." Grote's tone was more forceful. Swish! The woman's fair arms moved backward, and the veil fell off, fluttering down. Only a little fabric remained, preserving her last bit of dignity. She had been sold to this place by a slaver. Naturally, she was familiar with the cruelty of this world. Angering these nobles would result in her death without any consequences. So, before the man's anger erupted, she didn't dare to disobey him. Dignity, it was something to consider after surviving. Haha. Good, really good. Seeing the woman obey and reveal her delicate, snow-white skin satisfied Grote's desire to control. He downed the wine in his hands and ingested the bitter dried meat into his stomach. He got up and walked around the table, heading towards the woman. The woman instinctively wanted to retreat, but then stopped in her tracks. She couldn't avoid him. Just as Grote was about to pounce on her, sudden hurried footsteps came from outside the door. A look of displeasure crossed Grote's face. He hated it the most when people interrupted him at crucial moments. Master, something's happened. Outside, the butler's voice came. The butler was Grote's confidant. All the unspoken tasks were handled by him. When he said something had happened, it meant something of grave importance had occurred. He returned to his seat. Come in. The door opened, and the old butler walked in. So, what happened? The old butler didn't speak. Instead, his gaze flickered to the dancing woman beside them. Grote frowned slightly. He gestured the woman to leave. You may go now. Yes, sir. The woman nodded, picked up her veil from the ground, and ran out of the door. When the woman's figure vanished and the footstep sounds couldn't be heard, the old butler began, Master, the people didn't arrive, and we can't contact Sander. We're afraid. What did you say? Grote roared. The people, we lost contact with them. I've arranged someone to check in the civilian area, but there's still no news, the anxious butler reported. Bang! The wine glass smashed heavily on the table again. Grote's chest heaved with anger. Just a moment ago, he had planned to humiliate Rebecca at the council and torture her afterwards. But now, all those plans seemed extremely vague. Where are the people? You assured me there would be no problem, so why can't you carry out just one task properly? Grote roared furiously. Master, it's my incompetency. I'm willing to be punished. The butler knelt on the ground, lowering his head. You, Grote was furious, his face turning red. His butler was usually to his liking. Gathering women, proposing ideas, he had always handled everything perfectly. And moreover, he was his confidant. But for some unknown reason, everything always seemed to go wrong with the plan regarding Lyss City. Grote sat in silence for a while. Then got up and said, Get the carriage ready, we're going to Hubert. Yes, master. The butler immediately rose and left to make preparations. The next day. Today was the day of the 100 Cities Council meeting. Fang Hao got up early. With the help of the maid, he put on the complexly embroidered ceremonial garb. He never thought a garment would take a half-hour to don. But what he didn't expect even more was that it took Rebecca over an hour to put on her ceremonial gown. By the time she came out, the maids besides Byron were completely drenched in sweat. Were you guys fighting in the room? Fang Hao asked curiously. Rebecca rolled her eyes out of habit. Who's fighting? Let's hurry up. The two of them boarded the carriage and headed straight for the council hall. Along the way, colorful flags were planted all over, fluttering in the wind. The locals didn't resent this. In fact, during this period every year, the city's economy would see a significant boost in just a few days. It could also be considered a form of driving development. Carriage by carriage, escorted by their own security teams, headed towards the front. Pulling open the curtain, one could see the other carriages. They reached the council hall, and after a simple check, Rebecca, arm in arm with him, entered the council hall. The hall was incredibly spacious. The floor was covered in soft woolen carpets, filling the entire hall. On the stone pillars of the hall were carved magnificent bas-reliefs. Both sides of the wall were adorned with beautifully illustrated story murals. On one side of the platform, musicians were playing soothing music. Young and beautiful girls were softly singing along with the music. Their ethereal voices were very pleasing to the ears. The seats in the hall were divided into 3 areas. Chapter 724. At the very bottom, in the densest location, there were hundreds of seats. Placed orderly like those in a movie theater, all facing forward. The second area, slightly higher, was arranged on both sides, with scores of chairs almost reaching 100 in number. The third area was the highest platform. There were only 5 seats, all overlooking the councillors below. Rebecca, arm in arm with Fang Hao, led him to a spot in the second area and sat down. She began to explain, this is where the representatives of the 100 cities sit. What about the seats down there? Fang Hao asked, looking at the bottom where the seats resembled those in a cinema. Ah! That's where the General Council members sit, like union representatives, business group representatives, and various civil organization representatives, Rebecca replied in a low voice. Well, considering this, quite a lot of people are in attendance. If there were any terror organizations involved, they could probably abduct the whole high-ranking group of humans in one fell swoop, without leaving a single one behind. So, those on top, are they the big five you spoke of? Fang Hao directed his gaze upward to those 5 lofty seats. Both the chairs and tables were especially ornate. Rebecca lowered her voice and said, yes, these 5 people make up the upper council of the 100 cities. In theory, the 100 cities is a democracy where all council members vote, but the big 5 have the power to veto. In truth, whether or not something can happen often depends on their say. Oh, I see. This operation sounded quite familiar to Fang Hao. A many UN? The decision to proceed primarily depends on the attitude of the Big 5. If the Big 5 approve, it's easy to get past. If it's of no great interest to the Big 5, it will be very difficult to implement, no matter how much commotion is made below. So, each city resorts to clandestine activities, doing things that violate the 100 cities' regulations while keeping a mutual silence. Rebecca took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of Fang Hao. She said quietly, when you officially assume the position of the City Lord of LYSS City, you will have to stand and pledge your loyalty to humanity. Get familiar with it now so you won't be nervous then. Ah, so this is happening. Fang Hao looked at the text on the paper. The content wasn't a lot, it was mainly about loyalty to humanity. It didn't seem to be a problem. He read it carefully twice, making sure he was familiar with it. At that moment, Fang Hao felt a gaze on him, and he looked up. Only to see Grote and Hubert walk in together, their eyes full of hatred as they glared in his direction. While looking at the content on the paper, Fang Hao gave a friendly wave to the two of them. The pair were taken aback. Then, they turned away with rage on their faces. As time passed, the seats below gradually filled up with people. The place was chaotic, with many people discussing individual matters. Boom! The clock chimed upright, and 3 gigantic flags fell from the roof to the floor. The music being played by the musicians instantly surged, transforming from soothing to stirring and exciting. Leaning into Fang Hao's ear, Rebecca continued in her role as a guide. The middle one is the flag of the Human Federation, the one on the left signifies the Hall of Justice, and the one on the right is Silver Wing City's flag. Fang Hao nodded, but was full of surprise inside. He had a strange feeling of familiarity towards the flag on the left. Against the blue background was a copper emblem in the shape of a horn. The more he looked at it, the more familiar it seemed. Under the table, Fang Hao opened the Book of Lords. In the space inside, he examined the Valor Horn that was stored. Valor Horn, orange emblem. Category, Emblem. Ability, Emblem Wearers, Human, War Horn Attribute plus 100%. Description, during humanity's dark age, they united, wearing Valor Horn, lofty belief, sacred rampart, sharp thorn, and just truth, embarking the unification of humanity to resist the foreign race, defending the last dignity of humanity. The pattern on the flag was the Valor Horn. The emblem was a reward he received from a previous challenge mission. At that time, he faintly remembered it being mentioned that the emblem had been lost and its significance was extremely important to the human faction. Rebecca said this was the Hall of Justice flag, so did it have some connection with this emblem? Should he ask Rebecca to introduce him to Doherty, the leader of the Hall of Justice? This idea had just surfaced when Fang Hao gave it up. It's better not to take any risks. Everything should be founded on steady development. It is best if nothing that might cause changes occurs. This is what he thought. Clap! 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 A burst of intense applause startled Fang Hao. Lifting his head, he saw 5 people emerging from atop. Without a doubt, it had to be the 5 top personalities of the upper house. Rebecca, acting as the narrator, opens her mouth to introduce them again. The middle-aged man at the forefront is Doherty, the current Alliance of Justice's leader, Olivia's husband. He has a decent reputation, but he is somewhat old-fashioned. The one behind him dressed in the Archbishop's long robe is Milton. The 3 people behind are city lords under the Federation of the 100 Cities, wielding formidable power. Fang Hao, upon hearing this, also started observing the 5 top figures in the Federation of 100 Cities. Doherty looks to be in his 40s, physically strong, with dark skin that exudes an intimidating aura wherever he goes. He's dressed in a deep purple nobleman's robe, On the left side of his chest is an embroidered emblem of the war horn. The one stepping forward next to him is an old man. Tall and slender, wearing an abbey's long robe, he's handling a scepter. He has a kind countenance and is always smiling as he moves around, occasionally waving down. The last three men, all middle-aged, dressed in brocade robes, maintain calm facial expressions. However, it is apparent that their power is inferior to the two who are leading, considering they are following the two. When the five reach the top, they each sit down in their designated spot. After a simple opening, the swearing-in ceremony of the newly appointed city lords and senators begins. Those whose names are called stand up and begin reading from a piece of paper. There are many new appointees this year. But the process went smoothly, all they had to do was read from the paper. Yet, when it was Fang Hao's turn, an unexpected error occurred. Just as Fang Hao finished loudly reading the contents on the paper, standing tall, a voice came from the top above. "Fang Hao, you are a transmigrator, aren't you?" When Fang Hao lifts his head, he sees that the voice is Archbishop Milton's and he is looking straight at him. Although Milton looks 80 or 90 years old, his voice doesn't suit his age. It sounds more like a middle-aged man's and carries a strong bass. With the Archbishop interrupting at this moment, all the senators present feel that something is off. All eyes turn to Fang Hao. Fang Hao is startled, not understanding why there might be extra scenes when it's his turn. He looks down at Rebecca, asking whether this is part of the procedure. Yet, he sees unease and worry in Rebecca's eyes under his gaze. He realizes that this is not part of the procedure. He directs his gaze back at Milton and replies, smiling, "Yes, I am a transmigrator." The appearance of transmigrants is the most unstable factor in Silverwing City. It seems that LYSS City has managed this aspect fairly well. You guys get along rather harmoniously, don't you? Milton continues. The upper house has unbeatable authority. With Milton saying this, Fang Hao's situation becomes treacherous. Whether he can smoothly become the city lord or not, Milton's words hold significant weight. Fang Hao contemplates for a moment before saying, "What's unstable are social factors. They cannot be attributed to a particular group. It's like there being good and bad people in every city. We can't say everyone in a city is bad or good. Of course, transmigrants do include bad folks, but overall, transmigrants have higher quality compared to the locals." Milton looks at things from a local's perspective, which is inherently flawed. Milton would pose this question not because he couldn't accept transmigrants, but merely to trouble Fang Hao. The holy Saint Mao Zedong himself is also a transmigrant. He's given a great responsibility in the church, vying for the archbishop's position amongst the 12 holy saints. "Oh? So you're saying you have the confidence to manage LYSS City?" Milton asks, his expression unchanged, still bearing that same smile. He looks very much like a cunning old fox with a dagger hidden behind his smile. "I can." "Haha. Good, the young ones should have aspirations. But, I just received a piece of information that documents LYSS City's violations of the Federation's regulations over the past several years. You have just declared, so in your opinion, how should this matter be dealt with?" Archbishop Milton's eyes are full of interest as he looks at the two people below. Upon hearing this, everyone below breaks into an uproar. And beside him, Rebecca's face turns as white as a sheet, drained of all color. The person bringing up the indictment isn't Grote, but the Archbishop himself. It's over. Chapter 725. As he spoke up to this point, every member in the assembly had grasped his insinuations. The Archbishop charged the newly appointed city lord with several pieces of incriminating evidence on LYSS City. LYSS City had caught the attention of too many, with many hoping Rebecca would abdicate from her position. At this moment, the Archbishop, one of the 5 heads, personally presented this incriminating evidence. As a result, Rebecca was cornered. Perhaps, she wouldn't even have the chance to walk out of the council hall. Humph. It's the end of Rebecca's reign this year. She's been in charge of LYSS City for so many years, it's time she stepped down. I heard she killed her last husband. The upper house will definitely not allow her to continue controlling LYSS City. What can a woman possibly manage? I wonder who'd benefit from her imprisonment. The lower house members were drowning in whispers and murmurs. The Archbishop presented the evidence, which undeniably carried a level of certainty. Everyone understood this, it was over for Rebecca. Everyone watched, excited for the drama to unfold, but also seeking opportunities to undermine Rebecca and catch the Archbishop's attention. Seeing the Archbishop above, Fang Hao quickly understood why he hadn't been able to find these compiled pieces of incriminating evidence. Last night, he'd sent Lowry to Grote and Hubert's residences. He hadn't found this evidence because it had already been passed on to the Archbishop. However, all the witnesses had been killed. What's the point of producing unverifiable evidence? Was there a backup plan? Or did the Archbishop not know that the witnesses were already dead? He surreptitiously glanced at Grote, who sat below in the lower house. He noticed beads of sweat on Grote's forehead. His wavering gaze suggested deep pondering. Seeing this, Fang Hao confirmed. Grote had only handed the documents to the Archbishop. All those who could have indicted him were killed by Fang Hao last night, which the Archbishop was unaware of. This meant, they only had paper evidence that lacked compelling power. With these thoughts in mind, a smile still graced Fang Hao's face. He said, "Your Grace, Archbishop, I'm having trouble understanding your intentions. You may not understand, but Rebecca should grasp my meaning. In the past 3 years, Lyss City has illegally sold weapons to the orcs. Urban funds have vanished without a trace, and I've heard, to feed her vanity, she's used hefty public funds to exclusively design her clothes. Rebecca, anything you wish to say?" The Archbishop's palm hit the table with a resounding smack. Everyone knows the rules of the 100 cities have long been outdated, having ceased to apply to the varying situations of each city. Each city developed based on its own governance style, with everyone turning a blind eye. But now, it seemed like the Archbishop was determined to bring Rebecca down. While the lower house members observed the situation, the 5 members of the upper house remained calm. It seemed they already knew about this. It made sense. Rebecca was tipped off by Olivia and had the time to prepare. Rebecca stood up, still calm, and stated softly, "I have nothing to say. These accusations were fabricated by others, and I had no knowledge of such." Rebecca herself was tenacious. She had overtly and covertly fought with these nobles for decades. Not to mention that Fang Hao had taken care of all the witnesses. At this point, she couldn't afford to show weakness. "Are you sure about this, Rebecca? If you confess, there could be a way out. If you persist, you should know the consequences," the Archbishop roared angrily. Rebecca's face was still as stoic as ever. "How can I confess to a crime I did not commit?" At this moment, Doherty, the leader of the Hall of Justice, chimed in, "Rebecca, are you sure you are innocent?" According to Rebecca, Doherty was upright yet stubborn. Even if Rebecca and Olivia had a good relationship, he would never side with Rebecca. Hence, no witnesses from Lyss City should appear at the scene. "No, if you have any evidence, present it." Rebecca did not back down. Doherty refrained from speaking, while the Archbishop nearby sneered. His gaze settled on the lower house seat, precisely where Grote was seated. "Grote, bring the eyewitness." Grote wiped the sweat off his face. He gestured towards his men at the entrance. Sure enough, a few guards entered the room, escorting 2 humans. Rebecca was a bit restless initially, but upon recognizing the faces of the witnesses, she calmed down again. Grote stood up, forced a calm tone, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, these 2 can prove Rebecca's guilt." They took over the weapons equipment sold by Lyss City. Everyone turned their gaze towards Rebecca. But she had a smile on her face as she said loudly, "Grote, who are these 2 people? At least prepare a suitable identity for them." He had no choice but to push forward and said, "These 2 people are in charge of guarding and weapon manufacturing in Lyss City. They can validate everything that happens in Lyss City." After this, everyone in the room looked at Grote with suspicion. Even the Archbishop in the upper house frowned at him. "A guard and a craftsman. Regardless of their true identities, you want to use them as witnesses against Rebecca.